Do. All right. You are live, it says. Well, hello, everybody. This is a behind-the-scenes live recording session of AV
Secret
Rant.
stuff.
Secrets. We're the fancy behind-the-scenes version. Lee is here, as you can already see. Tom's away this week. And, because it's the behind-the-scenes version, if there's Skype dropouts like there were last week, well,
oh boy.
That's the way it's just going to be, which is why we put up later a complete video version, because we at least record our audio separately on our individual computers, Lee over at his, me over at mine, and that's way the audio will always be cleaned up, even though the video is what it is.
If my video screws up, I blame Comcast. They only give me 12 megabits per second up, despite giving me 215 down.
There is that. I think mine's only 15 up and I've got 300 down or some such. So
what is that crazy asymmetry there? What's the point?
That's a cable thing too, because the fiber optic service that's available is the same up and down, but whatever. That's not what we're here to talk about. You have been warned.
It's related though. It is related.
You have been warned that this is behind the scenes, and I better put up that thing before we begin. And all right, I guess I get to start whenever I'm ready.
Yes.
Welcome to another edition of AV Rant. My name is Rob H. I'm your host this week, and I'm here with
Lee Overstreet, once again pinch hitting. Tom is gone, and here I am.
That's right. Whenever Tom is away, Lee shall be the first person I call, and thankfully Lee was available this week, so it all worked out very nicely. Now, if anyone is looking at the numbering of these podcasts, you might notice that last week was episode number 665.
Right, so the next one logically should be what?
665 Mark II. That's what this is going to be. Okay, now it has nothing to do with Lee. You might be able to figure out what the next number in sequence would be if we were going with integers. But
I feel cheated. If anyone should get Devil Week, it should be me.
Next week is Halloween. Our episode comes out if Tom posts it on Friday. I guess it's actually it is. Wait a second. What would it be? All Hallows Day, because Halloween is All Hallows Eve.
That's a Catholic holiday something? I don't know.
Whatever it is, next week is Halloween, so we're saving our special number for next week.
I've never known what it's the eve of, honestly. It's All Hallows. What is All Hallows? I don't even know. I guess I could wiki it, right?
That should be written down somewhere. But also, if you've gotten this far in, you're like, what the heck is going on? This is AV Rant. It's your home theater and AV questions answered. We're a podcast. We answer questions sent to us about home theater and audio video systems. So that's who we are. And if you would like your question answered, all you have to do is write to us. Please send an email to question@avrant.com. Include pictures, include your name, send us your questions. We answer everything first in, first out, pretty much for the most part. First in, first out. Send them to question@avrant.com and they'll get answered. Now, there are other ways to get in touch with us. You can reach us on our website, which of course is avrant.com. You can also find us on Facebook, facebook.com/avrant podcast. And you can find us on YouTube, youtube.com/AVRant, where we have our videos posted there, and you can see pictures that get posted in the video. You can see our lovely faces side by side. And there we go. There's that. You can reach us individually. I have an email address, rob@avrant.com. Tom, our usual host here, is tom@avrant.com. And we're on Twitter. I'm @FirstReflect. Tom is @avrant_Tom. And our good friend here, our guest co-host this week, Lee Overstreet, is also on Twitter. What's your Twitter address?
I'm on Twitter. I'm Lee Overtweet. Lee Overtweet, because I'm so clever. When do I get my AV Rant email address?
Oh, yeah. Well, you know how good we are.
I've been doing this for 5 years. 6 years? 6 years I've been doing this.
You know how good we are about updating our website and keeping it going. So I'm going to estimate another 4 years, Lee. Another 4 years.
Okay, got to put in 10 solid years, and then you get an email address. And then after 20 years, I get to review a speaker.
Could be what happens. Well, we want to start off by thanking our listeners of the week, who are people who support our podcast in some way. Now, one way you can do that is come to our website, avrant.com, and over on the right-hand side, there is a graphic of a cup of coffee that Tom made all by himself. And if you click on that, it takes you to PayPal, where you can send us a one-time donation. Don't have to have a PayPal account. You can just use a credit card if you'd like to do that. And you can also sign up for an automatic monthly donation if you would like to via Patreon. We're at patreon.com/AVRant Podcast. We have 87 patrons over there now, including Brian F., who I'm pretty sure we mentioned last week, but you know what? We're getting to his question this week, and it never hurts to say thanks again for someone letting us know that they are a patron of ours. So thank you, Brian.
If you give money, we'll say your name a lot.
That is absolutely true. We don't mind repeating. Just let us know that you supported us in some way. If you support us in some other way, like talking to a manufacturer or mentioning us on a website or something like that, let us know. We'll throw your name out there as a listener of the week. So yeah, let's barrel right on into news. Did you want to read the news? Am I reading the news? I forget how this goes.
I'll read the news.
There you go.
You're the fountain of knowledge. I have to do the reading, right? Yeah. So in the news, RBH is discontinuing the Impression and Impression Elite Series speakers that we've so often recommended. At the moment, only the R55 towers and R5 and R5E bookshelf models are still available. But all is not lost. Big thank you to Ben F. on Twitter for being the first to bring this to our attention. And an extra big thank you to Damian D., who also noticed and alerted us and kind of panicked about it, but then let us know that he emailed RBH to inquire about the situation, and they confirmed to him that plans are underway for a new Impression series. But they do not have an ETA at this time, so no need to panic. The good speakers will continue.
That's what it seems like. I mean, this particular version of the Impression series wasn't around that long. So it does seem a little bit early to be discontinuing this current one and bringing out a new one at some point in the hopefully not too distant future at all. But I suspect it had to do with supply chain issues, because this current Impression series was quite frequently back ordered. And since the cabinets and a lot of the components are manufactured and made in China and then shipped over to the U.S., either partially assembled or I'm not sure the entire
Guess what's happening here
chain
right now, you know?
Yeah, there's a lot of issues with anything dealing with getting things imported from China at the moment. So I kind of suspect it's a supply chain issue that they're probably looking at, finding a more reliable and affordable way of getting all the components they need to them and assembled. That's purely spepeculation on my part, but
because for some reason things are costing more from China.
That's right. So in any case, they say
moving on,
new Impression series coming. That's good to know, and we'll eagerly await that. Yes.
There will never not be good speakers to choose from. New NVIDIA Shield TV devices are on the way. They haven't been officially announced by NVIDIA directly yet, but retailers accidentally listed them early and then pulled the listings back down. And all of the FCC filings have been made. So October 28th, there should be a new $200 Shield Pro and a $150 Shield Tube. Both get an upgraded Tegra X1 processor for 25% faster performance. More quotes, 25% faster performance. The Shield Pro retains 16 gigabytes of internal storage and 2 USB 3.0 ports for expansion. The Tube gets only 8 gig of internal storage, no USB ports, although it has a micro SD slot. Both get a new, larger remote that uses AAA batteries and has IR output to control the basic functions of a TV. And the shiny new feature is the addition of Dolby Vision support, which the outgoing $180 Shield lacked. So that is good news. It's a nicer box.
Yep, some nice upgrades there. Of course, anyone who is using Dolby Vision was waiting for the NVIDIA Shield to support it. So this new version will, that's for sure. What I wonder is if this new Tegra X1 Plus chip allows them to support Google's VP9 codec, because that was not hardware supported in the currently existing Shield, the one that is now discontinued. This new one, I mean, you would assume this is Android TV. So you would think if anything would support Google's own VP9 codec, it might be a box running Android TV. I hope so, because if it does, that will then make this the best external box for watching YouTube, because the NVIDIA Shield is already the only external streaming box that supports 5.1 audio from YouTube. There's no other external stream box that supports 5.1 audio. So the NVIDIA Shield already does. I would assume that carries over to the new NVIDIA Shield Pro and NVIDIA Shield Tube. But if they support the VP9 codec, then they'll be able to do 4K and HDR.
Right. So VP9 is what's necessary for that.
For
the higher end.
From YouTube. So that would, I'm assuming that will be the case. That will make this the best external YouTube box. Then it's already the best Plex external box. It's the only one that can be its own standalone Plex server and an excellent Plex player. Again, I'm assuming that will continue. There doesn't seem to be any reason why I would think it wouldn't, although who knows these days. Sometimes things go weird. And then now that it supports Dolby Vision, it does all the things. So for all the people who are like, why do you recommend the Apple TV 4K most highly, which I still recommend very, very highly, because the people who like it, yeah, it's an excellent external box, but it doesn't do YouTube 4K, it doesn't do YouTube 5.1 audio, and I can't call it the best Plex playback box because it doesn't support like full lossless bitstream output in the audio. The Apple TV 4K I'm talking about. The NVIDIA Shield does, so if it now does all the things, this will probably become my new go-to recommendation box.
Right. I would be so sad if I couldn't have 4K and HDR on YouTube.
You're right.
There's some really good stuff there. Some of the best stuff I've seen. Yeah. Some, if I'm ready to show my TV off to people, I got that LG OLED. It has a wonderful YouTube app. So, and I don't know if it can. Yeah, it does 5.1, doesn't it?
Yes. Yeah. Oddly enough, the built-in apps of certain smart TVs do it. But as far as external boxes go, it's been the Shield, but then you didn't get 4K HDR. So yes, fingers crossed.
It's funny to me how quickly streaming turned into the better quality picture compared to like cable. I mean, over the course of just a few years, it flipped completely, and my cable picture's terrible. So we move on to comments now. Billy M is our first comment. A little while ago, Billy told us about his setup where he's using a 2.35:1 screen with a Sony 4K projector and an anamorphic lens permanently in front of the Sony. He was using an Oppo 203 Ultra HD Blu-ray player, which thankfully offers scaling for a permanent anamorphic lens setup, just like his. But he wanted to try Panasonic's HDR optimizer, so he was asking if any of the Panasonic players can work with a permanent anamorphic lens, or if he would need to use an external video processor. We said to maybe try plugging the Panasonic player into the Oppo's HDMI input. Weren't sure if the Oppo's anamorphic scaling could be applied to other sources being plugged into the Oppo, but if he was willing, we thought it was worth a shot. He would essentially just be using the Oppo as a video processor rather than buying an entirely new video processor, and it worked.
Yeah.
How about that? And not only did it work, Billy was able to pick up a Panasonic UB420 on sale at Best Buy for only $219. So that all turned out to be much less expensive than he had anticipated, and he's very happy with the results. So he says thanks. How about that?
Well, thank you, Billy, for letting us know, because I was not sure. I do have an Oppo 203, but I don't have an anamorphic lens setup. And I guess I could have tested out if throwing something in there, a stream box or something, went through, but I'm not sure how all that would look. Regardless, Billy let us know. We have the answer now, and the answer is good, which is that essentially,
Isn't that great?
All the video processing stuff of the Oppo 203 works.
This show saved him money.
Yeah, that's the idea.
Look at that.
It was worth a try, so yes.
He's freed up some money to send us on Patreon. Just kidding. You don't have to send money. It's nice, but you don't have to. I don't get any of it. They get it. And 6 years filling in for. Anyway, just a few comments from me as we sit here, if that's okay.
Mm-hmm, absolutely.
Two things that I find interesting that I've noticed lately. So we have a contract with Comcast that is up in April. Okay. And the word contract means nothing to Comcast because they just took our HBO away.
Ah, right.
And so we had to go get it some other way. And my wife decided, well, we use Amazon Prime a lot. Let's just do it through Amazon Prime. Okay. You get HBO through there. Yeah. And movies look great, but it looks to me like anything that should be 60 frames per second, like live television should be, whether it's 1080i or 720p, is not. It looks like they're chopping it down to something like 24 or 30. It looks terrible.
Which device are you using to stream the Amazon Prime app?
That's the LG OLED.
So it's the built-in.
Straight out of it. It's the built-in app, and everything else on that app seems to look good, except that I haven't watched anything else via HBO that would be live TV. Right. I guess I could watch a boxing match to see what they do there. But for whatever reason, Real Time with Bill Maher we tend to watch. And it looked awful, choppy. It's like if you converted 60 frames per second to something like 24. So I would like to know if anybody else has experienced that.
The frame rate thing, honestly, is okay. The frame rate thing is one of the reasons I have continued to recommend the Apple TV 4K as the best stream box, because its match frame rate feature is on a hardware OS level. So it doesn't matter what app you're using, it will detect the incoming frame rate and match the outgoing frame rate
Sure.
of the box to whatever the source was. Not all of the boxes do that. Like, for example, the NVIDIA Shield doesn't do that. It is capable of automatically switching frame rates, but the app developer has to put it into their app. So like Plex has. Plex will switch itself between 24, 25, 30, 60, whatever, but not all of the apps on the current NVIDIA Shield do. That's another thing I'm hoping maybe this new NVIDIA Shield Pro and the Tube might support is hardware level frame rate matching, but we don't know for sure. So I think, I mean, it's hard to blame Atrio via Amazon Prime because they might be sending the correct frame rate, but it could just be the app that's built into your LG that handles the frame rate that way for some reason.
I would love to know.
Yeah.
So I'm tempted. I don't know if us paying for HBO via Amazon allows us to get a separate HBO Go app that I could try on the television.
Oh, so it was through the Amazon Prime app?
I think she did it through Amazon Prime. Yeah. I mean, the world is weird
It
now.
is.
Yeah.
The world is
She
weird.
did it through Amazon. She actually subscribed to HBO through Amazon.
Keeping track of what you're subscribing to and then what app you're using and then what device you're using. So which version of the app, on and on it goes. Yeah, there's a lot of
if
variables.
I'm paying for HBO, I should be able to get an HBO app on some device.
One would think. One would hope.
One would think. So maybe I should try the HBO app itself. I don't know.
Yeah.
Interesting. I just wondered if anybody else was experiencing that. And another interesting television thing. I'm a big college football fan. I watched Alabama football my whole life. Here I am in Alabama, in Tuscaloosa, where the university is, so I'm awash in it, right? And I was very excited to see that finally this year there are live 4K college football games. Not all of them, obviously, just a handful. But you have to have DirecTV and you have to have a certain box from them. I did read one article that mentioned maybe Comcast if you had a certain box that was capable of 4K from Comcast, and it's so frustrating. You would think, like football in America. Why in the world football in America isn't driving more live 4K television? Well, I don't understand.
I mean, we do have this year, finally, the NFL being broadcast only on the Fox Thursday night one. And again, a similar thing. I mean, pretty much only through cable providers, although not all of them. You know, Fios and Comcast in their case in particular for sure, but then others not necessarily. Sometimes it depends on your area. And you do have to have the correct set-top box from your cable company, and then via streaming they had a whole mess of it, and that was the NFL on Fox. So I mean, that's even
and
a step.
I can't get. You would think I should be able to get, like, if I'm paying a cable subscription for that includes ESPN.
Sure,
I should be able to watch. If ESPN has something in 4K, I should be able to watch it by some streaming ESPN app. And it's insane. The hardware has gotten out ahead of the supply of video nowadays, and it's really weird. I remember there were high def broadcasts years before, like about 7 years before I got a TV that could do high def. But nowadays it's flipped, and people have 8K televisions scrounging around for something to watch.
Well, asking them to update the entire broadcast chain is what has delayed everything, and we still don't have the official rollout of, okay, let's use the official name now, Next Gen TV, right? ATSC 3.0. That hasn't officially rolled out yet. So I think broadcasters are still waiting for that, because that is the new broadcast standard by which they will send 4K and HDR.
I still don't think that's coming anytime soon. Because there's too many people who have televisions and antennas and who can't afford new equipment and just aren't going to switch.
Well, you don't need new antennas. And
no, but you would need a new TV.
You don't need a new
wouldn't it be
TV. You need a new tuner. You just need a new tuner.
Right. So would your television channels all go away like it did when we switched?
There'll still be simulcasting in ATSC 1.0 for years to come.
Okay, so it's a separate frequency.
Yep.
So a different channel.
Yeah, it's a separate individual broadcast stream, a data bit stream. So
on the same channel?
Yeah, a lot of what they're having channels do is partner up, and one is sending out the ATSC 1.0 of both of their channels, and the other one is sending out the ATSC 3.0.
So they're cutting the bit rate and ruining the picture
quality. A little bit.
Of course. Of course. Let's keep making it worse.
Broadcasting 4K is a bit of a thing. I mean, they were aiming for 2020 all along. So we shall see what happens next year.
No, I don't think it's going to happen. Anyway, we've got questions from last week now that we're, 30 minutes into the show. Question from last week, Brian F. Via Twitter. Brian is about ready to buy a new projector. He has as much as $6,000 to spend. Hey, so naturally he was leaning towards getting a JVC. We do talk about those a lot in that price range. But then he came across a company called TV Specialists who offer projector modifications. One such modified model is the Theo Optima UHZ65, and they've posted some YouTube videos about it, including a comparison of their modified Theo with the JVC NX7 and Epson 6050UB. Okay, the stock UHZ65 Theo uses a laser.
The stock one. This is before they modify it. Yep.
The stock one before they Theo it uses a laser phosphor light source that lasts 20,000 hours. Normally, Optima only claims it will produce the Rec 709 color gamut. That's where the Theo mod comes in. They add a filter and change the color wheel so that it can reach a claimed 80% of Rec 2020. Plus, they fully calibrate each individual unit and load new firmware so that colors remain accurate with the new modifications in place. The regular UHZ65 goes for $4,000 and the mod costs $1,500. So the price is right in line with the least expensive 4K JVC, the NX5. And in their comparison videos, the Theo seemingly goes toe-to-toe with the more expensive NX7. So, Rob, is it too good to be true? Are we familiar with these types of modifications? Should he get the Theo instead of a JVC? Let me tell you, my instinct is that a modded device I'm suspicious of compared to one that did it from scratch. Well, that's my instinct. I don't know if that's a bad instinct or what.
They claim that they work directly with the manufacturers and that this is a quote unquote authorized modification. In other words, you still have warranty coverage. That is the claim that they make. So, okay, I'll take them at their word as far as that goes. Yeah, I've seen other modifications like this on previous model projectors. It's usually in a case where people look at the underlying components of the projector, and very similar, this UHZ65 in Optima's lineup is technically listed under their business class projectors, but it has a bunch of great capabilities that people say, if you just tweak this a little, it would make a fantastic home theater projector, and that was the entire idea of doing this modification. Because they basically went from maximum lumen output under the stock version.
That's a businessy thing.
Absolutely. And then they're like, well, it's got all this extra light output. Yes, we will have to cut the light output by putting a filter in place and changing the color wheel, but it's got lumens to spare. So if we did that, now we can have beautiful wide color. It's already using one of the DLP chips that it's the 0.66 inch chip, which means it's got a resolution that I can't quite remember, but if you exactly double it, you end up with very close to regular 4K resolution. It is a wobbling
So they're
chip.
having to scale it to something slightly
It's a
off?
little bit teeny bit off, but they are wobbling the chip, using it twice per frame and giving you the full 8 million individual pixels that way. But it's not a true, genuine 4K chip just all by itself. But regardless, all of that stuff, now the UHZ65, the stock model that you buy from Optima for $4,000, is a really, really good projector. Even for home theater, it's already a really good projector. So modifying it in this way, and there's no reason why doing these mods wouldn't expand the color gamut. That's perfectly fine. Yes, they talk about it cuts the maximum lumens, but you get the wider
So the color gamut is literally dependent on the material that wheel's made of?
That and a filter and the light that you're starting with. But they're using two blue lasers, one of which activates a yellow phosphor. That yellow phosphor doesn't have as narrow red and green elements as if you had, 3 individual light sources.
Right.
So by modifying the color wheel to like RGB instead of RGBY, which is what the business class version uses, and putting in this filter allows them to get really narrow color points and this wider color that exceeds DCI P3. And so all of that stuff makes sense. Also, because you're cutting the light output overall by having a universal filter, it lowers the black level. So in that way, it improves the black level because you're filtering out some of the light.
Right.
So when they compare it to JVC's NX7, even in their comparison, the NX7 was still the outright black level champion. It still had the deepest black levels, and when you went just above black, 1 or 2 steps just above black, the Optima more quickly rose out of black, whereas the NX7 gave you those very, very small and fine gradations. So, which is technically more accurate to the source. So even with their own the video, they completely own up to that. The one area where I quibble a little bit is they show a contrast, an ANSI contrast checkerboard. Yeah. And they talk about how, essentially the Epson was actually the brightest out of all of them at this point. And then the black levels were really, really similar amongst all three. And we wouldn't necessarily expect that, but they mentioned in their own video how their room is not completely blacked out. I mean, the lights are off. It's light controlled. It's not like they have sunlight coming in, but it's not a completely blacked out room. And they go, well, that's fair because we're using all 3 projectors in the same room and measuring them. But I'm like, but you can't measure the absolute darkest black level when the room itself is now the floor.
Not black.
Right? So there's a little bit of that going on in the video. But bottom line, if you were to get this modified Theo version of the UHD65, I don't think you'd be disappointed. It was already a really good projector, and there's no reason why their mods couldn't improve the color gamut. But all of that said, the one thing that nobody else has right now is what JVC recently added, which is frame-by-frame HDR tone mapping, right? Where it analyzes the incoming signal frame by frame, just like Lee's LG OLED does, and frame-by-frame adjusts the tone mapping. Nobody else has that, and it's kind of a game changer for projectors. And given that the price points are so similar, I'm like, if nothing else, I would get the JVC just for that.
Yeah. So what are the price differences here? We're looking at this like Theo for $5,500.
Well, if you're talking the NX5, they're exactly the same price.
Okay. And how much is the 7?
The 7, the retail price, I think it's still listed an MSRP of $8,000 if I'm not incorrect, but you can find them for right around 7 quite easily. That's kind of the going street price now. And then he was talking about how, if you look around a bit, you can find them like $6,000, $6,500, and he's right in that $6,000 range.
Wait, do you need the NX7 to get the frame by frame?
Nope.
Or no, the NX5?
The NX5 has it. The NX5 doesn't have quite as deep black levels as the NX7, although now it's really comparable to what this Theo is doing with its DLP chip. Right. And so the NX7 also has itself an additional color filter to get even wider color than the NX5. But the NX5 is already like 90% of DCI-P3. So that's... honestly, I say still go for the JVC. I think that dynamic tone mapping frame by frame is a game changer, and it is still the black level champion, and it is still the most accurate out of these at the just above black levels. So for all those reasons, I would still point you towards the JVC. Also,
I'm with you.
It has a better lens. Unquestionably, the JVCs have a better lens. It is more uniform. It is an all-glass lens in the JVCs. And so from edge to edge, it is super uniform, and the Optima absolutely is not. The Optima is like 56% uniformity, which is actually kind of low for projectors just in general. So
that's a big deal for lenses. As someone who takes pictures, a good lens is tack sharp out to the edges, and there's none of that color fringing where you get the red.
You won't see in their comparison because they're only taking a wedge of the center. So that's another. One other thing: the JVCs have fully motorized lenses, and the Optima is manual. So if you want to do any motorized zooming in and out for a 2.35 to 1 constant image height or anything like that, the JVCs can do that right there. They have lens memory and everything. So all of that together, get the JVC.
I think so. Brannon M. Brannon has found a couple of deals on lightly used or refurbished Epson 5040 UB projectors. So he bought one for $900.
That's a good deal.
And no kidding. And at that price, since this is his first projector, if he decides that he loves projectors in general, he feels he'll be able to upgrade to something like a JVC in the not too distant future. All right. He's using a 120-inch silver ticket screen sitting 11 feet away in a 16 by 24 foot room with full light control. And you see Rob doing the thumbs up because that sounds he did the calculations instantly in his head. He's like 120 inch, 11 feet away, and he goes like hypotenuse, and he knew exactly those.
43 degree field of view, by the way.
43 degree field of view. He did it. See, I'm not kidding. You are weird, man. They use it for movies and TV and playing games on Xbox One. It must be amazing for the game playing with that kind of
to suddenly go to 120 inches. I'm sure that's not what he had before.
It's got to be crazy. So question number one, what would be the ideal distance from the projector to the 120-inch screen?
So this is an Epson. You have a huge zoom range to work with. There's not really like a bad way to put this projector. Now, I will say, if you have it as far back as the lens possibly allows it to be versus as close as the zoom lens allows it to be, there is a difference in light output. When the projector is as close as it can possibly be, it is brighter than when it is as far away as it can possibly be. But when we're talking these numbers that I'm about to give, this is from the lens, from the front of the projector to the screen. So remember, there is a body behind that. It's about 18 inches deep, that Epson 5040 UB. So don't forget that there's a body behind the lens. But if the lens is anywhere from 11 feet 9 inches to 24 feet 9 inches, it will be able to throw a 120-inch image. Now, I don't know which way his room is oriented. It's 16 by 24, but even if you're in the room the long way, you could have that thing on the back wall, no problem, right? The lens can be 24 feet 9 inches away, so the lens would be closer than that if your room is 24 feet long. Again, you've got the body of the projector. So on a technical level, there is no reason why you can't have this anywhere from your back wall all the way to directly over your head if you're 11 feet away from your screen. I would recommend, so since we've got that, I mean, if mounting it on your back wall is actually the most convenient thing to do, I am all for that. Tom and I are both fans of mounting a projector on your back wall if you can, because
plus you can get it closer to the vertical center of the screen.
You can do that if you want to.
Because if you're really close, that angle is greater. From the projector to the bottom of the screen if it's up high on the ceiling.
And it gives you the easy option of if you were thinking about how am I going to wire this up. I mean, you could have all your equipment at the back of the room now, and then it's a short HDMI cable up the back wall. You don't necessarily have to put anything in wall. If it's behind you and you're not looking at it, maybe cover with a curtain or something like that, right?
Yeah, a shelf. A shelf is so much easier than a ceiling mount. That's for sure.
There's the power part of it, because if it's mounted on your back wall, it's easy to run that projector's power cord down to a battery backup, which we would definitely recommend you plug it into a battery backup. If your power ever cuts out while it's on, it saves your fan and it saves your lamp. So if you're mounting it on the ceiling, obviously tons of people do, but we always recommend if you mount it on the ceiling that instead of just installing an electrical outlet on your ceiling that runs back to your electrical panel and therefore it doesn't have battery backup, that you install what is essentially a proper in-ceiling extension cord where you run the outlet that's you've installed in your ceiling down to a male inlet that is close to where you have your battery backup, and then you just plug your battery backup into the male inlet, and now that feeds your projector. But all of that is more complexity than if you just have your projector on the back wall.
Man, I would stick it on the back wall if it was within that zoom range. You better believe I just put it on a shelf. That is just so much easier, and you can reach it easier. You know, do a little dusting.
If you want to clean the filter, all that stuff, or make a small adjustment, right? Whatever it is.
So you just reach.
If you can, I'm in favor of that. Also, even with it all the way back there, on a 120-inch screen, the 5040 UB could still throw 200 nits, which is more than you need. So there's not really much reason. But let's put all that aside, because I know he's asking about ceiling mounts coming up next. If you just want to mount it on the ceiling mount, you've thought all this through, you know how the wiring is going to go and all that, I do recommend, I personally like to have it a little ways behind me. I don't like a projector directly above my head, even though
you're going to hear the fan. That's
right.
For one thing, I hate hearing whirs and buzzes and zzz.
Even though the 5040 UB is a quiet projector by any projector standards, it's a quiet projector.
But if it's
right there, and a tiny little bit of light spill if there is any, it's that type of thing. So I like to have it behind me if I can. About 3 feet or a little bit more is where I like to have my projector mounted above me. So, I mean, that's all I would recommend, because you have that whole range. It can easily go anywhere from the back wall to directly over your head. So,
plus you want that Atmos voice of God speaker directly over your head.
Oro,
right there.
If you did Oro, there would be that. That's right. But I mean,
right there.
Piles of zoom range, piles of lens shift range on this thing. So, it's essentially pick your poison, and there isn't a tremendous reason why you need to mount it forward or back in your case.
Right. Here's his question about that. He did a little research and he heard us talk about how nice it is to use a projector ceiling mount with gear adjustments to perfectly line up the image. Right. He's found the Chief RPM and the Peerless PRG. The Peerless is about half the price. So is there any reason that the Chief would be significantly better and worth the price difference? I'm going to guess no.
So all it really is the Chief has more available official add-ons. For example, they have like a sled so that you can actually move the entire mount. I mean, depending on how you orient it, forward or back or left or right is what they mean it for. So yeah, they've got that sled. They've got some different extension options or like angle bracket options, those type of things. It's a little bit more flexible in the official add-ons that are there. So that's kind of what that's for. If you're just going to take the mount the mount to the ceiling and connect the mount to your projector, get the Peerless.
No compelling reason.
It's an excellent mount. I've used it myself. I'm totally in favor of it, and I think it's a great value.
But of course, you're just going to stick it on a shelf in the back of the room and send us a picture.
Also be the case, and then you don't need either of them. Yeah.
Could we point him to some picture mode and settings suggestions? He'd like settings for SDR in the dark, HDR in the dark, and daytime modes if possible. That makes sense.
Well, instead of going through them all those settings, me speaking them out, I will send you to a link because somebody has already done this very, very nicely, and those are the good folks over at projectorreviews.com. So we'll have the link specifically for this on avrant.com and in the show notes on YouTube. But if you just want to Google search it for yourself, look up it's Projector Reviews with an S on the end.com. It's their review of the 6040 UB, but they are identical, the 5040 and the 6040. They have a whole section in their review that is just the calibration settings. Now, if you read it, they already tell you this, what I'm about to say, but not everybody reads the wall of text that Projector Reviews presents you with. So at the very bottom of that page, scroll down to the bottom, they just have a slideshow where they took photos of their settings. And guess what they have? They have a setting for SDR in the dark, HDR in the dark, and a daytime setting. It's exactly what you asked for. Just so you know, since the slideshow that they have loops, and you by the time you scroll down there, you might not be sure exactly where in the slideshow you are.
Oh, just let it go. Keep hitting pause.
You could. I mean, it does go back to the beginning, but
okay.
Just to put this out for anyone who doesn't want to go into the deep dive, but just wants to select the right picture modes. It's a little bit unusual because the natural picture mode, they have a picture mode labeled natural. That is the best one to use for standard dynamic range in the dark. It is accurate Rec 709 color, and it is not boosting the brightness. They have a setting called Bright Cinema. Surprise, surprise, that's the best one to use in an ambient light setting in the daytime. And then they have one called Digital Cinema, and that is the one that activates the wide DCI P3 color, so it's the best one for HDR. That's in Projector Reviews settings, but in case the slideshow is looping and you've lost your place, Natural, Bright Cinema, and Digital Cinema.
I've still got to figure out how to shoot HLG HDR on my Sony camera.
It can do
that video. Right? It can't. I just got to figure. I don't even know how to process that on my computer. Like it's too far out there. Anyway, we continue with Brandon's questions. He'd also like to use an Apple TV 4K. What audio and video settings should he use on the Apple TV 4K?
Right.
And I know you have that answer.
Yeah, so this one is a little bit trickier just because the 5040 UB, the one thing that it lacks, and the reason why the 5050 UB is, the top pick now, although the price is a lot more than this $900 that he paid anyway. The 5040 UB had 10.2 gigabit per second HDMI inputs, not the full 18 gigabit. So it could accept 4K at 60 hertz, but only with 8-bit color. That means no HDR. Or it could do 4K with HDR, but only at 24 or 30 frames per second, not 60 frames per second. So for gamers in particular who wanted 4K at 60 frames per second with HDR, The 5040 UB couldn't do that. It was just a bandwidth limitation of its HDMI inputs. Then on top of that, the new 5050 UB has some niceties for HDR settings where they just gave you one button directly on the remote that gives you a slider to brighten or dim the entire HDR image as a whole, where you have to dig through the settings on the 5040 UB to do that, and it doesn't have as many steps as the 5050 does. So when it comes to the Apple TV 4K, number one thing, do not activate Dolby Vision. I mean, your projector doesn't support it anyway, but definitely do not activate Dolby Vision. Put it into its 420 chroma output. It gives you the option of 444 or 420. Put it into 420. That saves you some bandwidth. But then, what I would recommend is, in this case, do not activate frame rate matching. There's the setting in the Apple TV 4K for matching content. Let it match the dynamic range. That'll let you switch between HDR and SDR as you want to. But do not activate the frame rate automatic switching, because that could throw you into the situation where it's 4K at 60 with HDR, and you'll end up with a blank image. I would also recommend, as the default resolution output of the Apple TV 4K, set that to 4K standard dynamic range at 24 frames a second.
Okay, so yeah, you're down to you're going to get movies correctly, yep. But if you had a 4K 60...
Now, if you're like Lee, and you know you're watching something that's 4K 60 and not HDR, then that's the time to manually go in there and say, okay, put out 4K SDR at 60 frames per second when you're watching that content. You would do that manually. But the reason I'm saying to do it this way...
That wouldn't be worth the effort, honestly, because most things that I ever see that would match that description, 60 FPS, but 4K... It's not going to be...
It's not everything. It's not the majority of things. No. So that's why I'm saying to go with what is the majority of things, and this makes sure the 24. Image remain like you see it. It's not a black thing that you have to go and take your Apple TV 4K and plug it into some other display to get your settings back, right? So I'm setting... You're kind of setting it to the lower end of what the Apple TV 4K can do with 4K resolution. So 4K standard dynamic range, 24 frames a second as the default. Go ahead and let it match the dynamic range so it switches between SDR and HDR, but avoid matching the frame rate just in this instance, because it could put you into a format that your Epson can't intake via its limited bandwidth HDMI. So a few things to look out for there. We did miss the question about the Panasonic, so let's pop up to D here.
We did? Oh, would it be worth the reasonable price to get a Panasonic UB420 Ultra HD Blu-ray player to pair with the 5040 UB? I mean, after all, they both have UB.
If you're going to watch a bunch of Ultra HD Blu-rays, I definitely think so. Because there are lots of Ultra HD Blu-ray discs that have either been mastered at more than 1,000 nits, or they have just blanked out the metadata and there essentially is no data on those discs for the Epson itself to read. But the Panasonic can bring everything down and send it out at either 500 nits or 1,000 nits, whichever you choose, and the Epson can tone map everything that's being sent to it at either of those really, really nicely, and now it'll be consistent. Now, of course, when you switch to a streaming service, that goes away. Now, or a game, you switch to a game, that goes away. But if you're going to watch a lot of Ultra HD Blu-ray physical discs, it's totally right. They're $220 at Best Buy now. And if you're going to get an Ultra HD Blu-ray player anyway, why not get the one that keeps the HDR looking consistent from disc to disc?
Yeah, the one that best matches your projector. So ironically, they both say UB, and they do happen to match. So there you go. He's making DIY panels with plans already in place for where they will go at his first reflection points and along the rest of his sidewalls. Much respect. Love it. But along his back wall, pretty much right in the middle, there's a gap where the room extends back a bit farther for the stairway with a door, as well as a nook where he keeps a desk and a couple of side doorways into other rooms. Should he put panels anywhere in that extended back section, since we often recommend having panels directly behind the seats? You know, I would, especially in the surfaces that come right back at the back of your head.
Sure.
I don't see how, it can't hurt.
Yeah, I mean, the actual physical back wall, which is back in his nook where he's got his desk and some papers and that. But, I mean, there's not much reason not to.
Right.
We're talking about maybe a 4-inch thick panel would be nice back there, but it does look like that space would be straight behind his primary seat. Now, the farther away the back wall is from your head, right? The more distance you have between your back wall and the back of your head, the less I'm worried about having a panel back there, right? A lot of people have their seat pretty much right up against their back wall, and then I'm like, you must have an absorption panel back there. But the more distance you have, it's that inverse square law, right? That sound is traveling a greater distance. It's getting weaker, both as it goes past you and then bounces on the wall and comes back. So...
It doesn't look too far away in the picture, so I'm thinking I'd throw one back there. I would.
I mean, if
I'd
you're
take a
making
minute to
DIY panels, you put some insulation back there. Absolutely.
Now he has some little track lighting on the ceiling that's kind of aiming a beam right at the spot where I would put a panel, which is going to be right behind it. And so what I would do is get one of those, get something printed. What's that service that we've talked about before?
Well, there's multiple places that do it. I mean, Git does have dyed panels, and then Acustamac is the easiest place to get ready-made printed panels, including ones that they've already done. Get you a picture
printed on some cloth that could go over a panel back there, and it would look fantastic.
It really would. Yeah, it would look extremely suitable. No one would be like, why is there an image back there? Totally looks its place, and now it's playing double duty as an absorption panel. I mean, I wouldn't mind having some panels on the closer section of the back wall that's over to what it would be his right when he's facing forward. Around
his rear speakers?
Yeah, around his rear speaker and where the light switch is back there. So, I mean, I would have panels on your back wall. Like I say, in your case, since you do have some distance, I wouldn't expect you to be like, oh, night and day difference that it made. But if you're making the panels anyway, throw some back there.
Yeah, and also just the whole room begins to sound cozier and have a nicer feel for me. That's my opinion. I love a good, like, less reflective room. It's just so relaxing. I don't know. I really like it. It's very quiet. Okay, he's got one more question. He is using Ascend Horizon speakers up front, which are front ported, and HTM 200 SE, which are sealed for surrounds and surround backs. Should any of his speakers have panels behind them? Do panels make a difference when the speakers do not have rear ports?
So since bass, and I mean, we're talking anything below 200 hertz here, so your speakers are playing that, and bass comes out essentially omnidirectional, right? The part that moves forward and the part that comes back, it just wraps right around the width of any speaker very, very easily. So yes, even without rear ports, the back wave of a bass frequency absolutely will still impact on the sound. I wouldn't put any panels behind your surround and surround back speakers, though. I mean, they're essentially mounted on the wall. I mean, in his case, going back to that whole idea of a rear projector shelf, he's already using little shelving units to hold up his surround back speakers. We can see that. But I mean, I wouldn't put panels behind the speakers themselves in those cases. Your front speakers, though, absolutely. I would have speakers behind those. I doubt that his horizons are like pressed right up against his front wall. He probably has some distance there, and I absolutely would go ahead and put some panels on your front wall behind your front speakers.
Just cover everything.
Well, you don't want to go crazy overboard, but I mean, to get to about 30% of your total surface area, and given that his ceiling is bare, right? To get to about 30% of your total surface area covered, you got to throw some panels around.
You do. But you don't want to walk in and feel deaf.
No.
I've been in rooms like that where you walk in and it's just gone. All sound is gone. It feels weird. You hear your heartbeat in your throat, you know? All right. So finally, we have some new questions, Rob.
Yes, we do.
New for this week, Sean W. has questions. Or a question. Questions? Yes. First, an update. After our discussion about Wi-Fi speakers for $200, Sean and his wife decided to try the Yamaha Music Cast 20, and his wife loves it. So he says, thank you for that recommendation. Always good when you get the spousal approval and people love it.
I'm very glad you're happy with that.
You bet. They just bought a new house and they need a big TV for the living room. Yay. He's not concerned about critical viewing. This is for cable TV in the background and Netflix for the kids. He'd like to keep the price under $1,500, but he wants at least 75-inch TV or bigger, although if it's possible to go even larger at that price, he'd be into that. Yep. So what can we suggest? And I see a very good suggestions set.
Sure.
Right. So I mean,
the one that'll immediately jump to mind, and if you go on forums and everything, this will be the first one up. TCL's 75-inch 6 series. It'd be the 615 if you're buying from Best Buy, or the 617 if you're getting it at Amazon. It is $1,300 for the 75-inch size right now, so it certainly fits your budget. And, of course, what everybody likes about it is full array local dimming, Dolby Vision support. It actually hits 1,000 nits. DCI P3 color are like 96% of it. I mean, it checks all the boxes. The things about it that some people don't like, if you're being critical, is that...
And he's not,
but it does have a little bit of panel uniformity that isn't the greatest, right? The edges, the corners are a little bit darker. You get some dirty screen effect that's just in there. And there is a little bit of banding here and there that people sometimes see. But honestly, for what you're talking about, I wouldn't worry about those things at all. And it's actually a very capable TV.
Right.
And it's the cheapest one out of all the ones I'm going to mention. So you might just stop there. The other thing
that seems to fit the bill perfectly. I'm not a fan of TCL myself, but then again, when I was shopping for a TV,
this is their higher end.
Yeah, this is both their higher end, and we're being told that the picture quality doesn't matter as much on this TV. So boy, that just sounds perfect.
It's still darn good. So you know, that's a pretty easy recommendation. It is a 60 hertz panel. The native refresh rate of the panel is 60 hertz. So that is one thing. That is one reason why personally I like Vizio's P series. The Vizio P series is a native 120 hertz panel, and it also does all the things: full array local dimming, Dolby Vision support. Not quite as bright in the peak brightness as the TCL 6 series. It only gets up to about 800 nits instead of a full 1000. But they actually have the 2019 brand new 75-inch P75G1. So that's the brand new one. Now it has quantum dots. So it gets like 98% of DCI P3. Like, it's a pretty killer TV just in outright. But it is $1,600 for the 75-inch brand new Vizio P Series Quantum 2019.
So if you do want to be a little bit critical, that'd be where you'd want to go.
It's got the little bit wider color. Yep, there you go. But kind of like the TCL, the uniformity still isn't fantastic. It's got some color banding. It's got a little bit of dirty screen effect. That's all in there. So if the most important thing to you is not Dolby Vision support, it's not maximum, 1000 nit for HDR, but you'd like some better panel uniformity, I don't want to overlook Samsung's RU8000 series. Now, this is edge-lit. It doesn't do Dolby Vision. It does support HDR, but it really only hits about 400 nits, so it's not a HDR powerhouse. But it's got less dirty screen effect. It's got better panel uniformity than the TCL or Vizio. So if that's the number one concern for you, I don't want you to overlook it. The 75-incher RU8000 from Samsung is right at $1,500. They also have an 82-inch. It's the only one out of these that offers an even larger size, because there is no larger size from the TCL or the Vizio. But the Samsung's RU8000 series does offer an 82-inch size. It's $1,750 if you look around. So it's more than the $1,500 you were looking for. The 75 is right at 1,500. So yeah, there you go.
Yeah. No, those are all good. It just depends on how important your picture quality is.
That's right.
Apparently. Infinite Gary, of course, has a question. I'm here. Infinite Gary always asks a question when I'm here. Does he just always ask a question?
He almost always asks a question every week, so yes.
I love it. All right, Infinite Gary, throwback. Gary still has a Nakamichi RX 505 auto-reversing stereo cassette deck. How about, I'm so happy to hear that. My cassette love goes way back. I have a whole series of mixtapes from the 80s.
I was thinking how this is very appropriate for you to be here to talk about this.
Dude, my junior high and high school is just replete, and into early college, with cassettes and dubbing things, and like 45 vinyl, and then later CDs, and I just love it. I'd like to talk to him about what his favorite blank cassettes are and how they sound. When XM radio came out, he used the Nakamichi with some high-end metal cassette tapes. All right, yeah, I do have some of those too, to record some songs and other audio broadcasts. He also tried using his JVC Super VHS player, I've got 3 of those, to make some recordings sounds from XM radio using their highly touted VHS hi-fi stereo audio mode. Hey, all brands, if their hi-fi is working right, is fantastic. That's pretty universal among hi-fi VCRs. So which was better? To his ears, he preferred the way his Nakamichi and metal cassettes sounded. But on a technical level, how did VHS hi-fi on a Super VHS player stack up? Hey, I've got the answer to this.
I'll let you go for it then, because I looked this up, but I might be wrong. Lee really knows this stuff, so
I do. This is a thing I know.
All right.
Yes. So the VHS hi-fi system is actually quite fantastic. It is 20 to 20,000 hertz, almost perfectly flat, plus or minus 3 dB all the way out. And it's particularly good at the higher frequencies because the weird way that VHS works, higher frequencies are actually easier to record. The lower frequencies are harder.
Well, they were using audio frequency modulation for the hi-fi version of VHS audio, and they were actually embedding it within the video signal.
That's
and the
right.
video signal is running at a much higher frequency than audio usually is. So, yeah, it ended up being the high part frequencies that worked.
I remember Maxell had a hi-fi optimized tape that had some particles in the formulation that would react better to the very lowest parts of that video embedded signal. And so it actually made for some really good hi-fi. So on a technical level, the VHS hi-fi system, if it's working right, and that's if your alignments are right and your head switching as the VHS heads spin, if that head switching is timed just perfect like it's supposed to be, and most of the time it is, that's actually going to be better than that Nakamichi. However, a Nakamichi with a metal tape and properly calibrated Dolby noise reduction, which is always tough.
There's a lot that can be done on that Nakamichi to adjust the sort of audio settings at both in and out.
But here's the neat thing. VHS hi-fi doesn't need any noise reduction. By its nature, it has enormous dynamic range and that very good frequency response. So the Nakamichi, if it's tuned out right and working properly, it can sound amazing. But I would guarantee you, if you put them side by side and really either really listened or measured, that technically the VHS is better. However, the fact that he prefers the Nakamichi on that metal tape, that's going to probably come down to the kind of frequency response curve that pleases his ears more, the dynamic, the kind of compression that Dolby does. Sometimes it just sounds better with certain music to certain people's ears. So perfectly legit that he thinks his Nakamichi sounds better. And I might like it better too, because VHS hi-fi, it kind of like a CD, can feel harsh because it is so accurate. It's just sort of crisp and dead. It's all, like there's a certain sort of flavor to analog sound. And VHS hi-fi, although it's analog, is weirdly crisp, clear.
Well, I mean, it had 90 dB of dynamic range in total and a 70 dB of signal to noise ratio, which is second only to CD. I mean, at the time, VHS hi-fi was the second best that you could on a technical level. In 1990, Christmas 1990, I got a VHS hi-fi for the first time finally. And man, it's wonderful. I would dub CDs from people. I would borrow CDs and make my own copies onto VHS hi-fi. And thankfully, when I did a radio show for years, I had that to record. Even in the EP mode, even in the 6-hour mode, the track width for the hi-fi is the same whether you're using 2-hour or 6-hour mode. So the sound quality is the same at 6 hours as it is at 2 hours. And so I could set it to record my 3-hour radio show. I'd get 2 shows on one tape. And I archived every single one of those hundreds of radio shows that I did. And I have them in a big old stack of VHS holders. But, the classic wood grain VHS drawers. I have tons of them in a closet right over there. VHS better, but not. I mean, when you're using a metal tape and a Nakamichi, just for comparison purposes, before you had everything with VHS hi-fi on it, or if you just had, a cheap VHS deck that only did the original version of audio that was on VHS, it was a linear recording track.
It was terrible.
It was along the top edge, like they used a physically different part of the tape that was up there. It only recorded from, at best, 100 hertz to 10 kilohertz. So the frequency range was limited, and that was at best. I mean, very often it was more limited than that.
It did apply some noise reduction, but and there was a stereo version they tried to make
that
of that
cut it in
linear
half.
track.
It made it even worse.
And it was just doo-doo. I don't even know.
Right.
Yeah.
And it was 42 decibels signal to noise ratio at best. So, there was the old Dolby B noise reduction. That was that. What that did is it boosted the recording level of the mid-range and then knocked everything back down when you played it back. So it knocked the noise down and the mid-range stayed, but you lost even more frequency range.
Yeah, it was kind of honky terrible. But see, the thing is, all these products are designed for what people are using at the time. And the average television at the time when they made VHS was a 19-inch TV with a little oval speaker.
One little mono speaker,
just about 4 inches across.
Right.
And you can't hear anything above 10K there, so it was actually quite perfect. And his Nakamichi tape deck is sort of the pinnacle of cassette. That's about as good as cassettes ever got. And he can probably get a 20 kilohertz signal, but it's not going to be quite as accurate as that VHS Hi-Fi. And also 99.5% of everybody's cassette experience is nowhere near as good as that Nakamichi. I know mine is.
Exactly.
I have a really nice Pioneer that has Dolby S, and that's as good as I've ever heard. And it's just finicky, though, because Dolby isn't always calibrated perfectly from one cassette deck to another. And so cassettes are frustrating. He has a very good one, but no, VHS Hi-Fi pretty consistent across the board.
That's right, yeah. VHS Hi-Fi, I mean, certainly compared to the original linear version of audio on VHS, worlds apart. So VHS Hi-Fi, technically, pretty darn good.
Really, that's as good as analog audio got for consumers. As far as I could tell. I mean, maybe someone has a 15 inches per second reel-to-reel that they could argue with me. Maybe. So also, moving on. Gary watches NHL hockey from time to time. As far as Canadian teams go, he most often catches Calgary or Edmonton games. He's noticed that when it's a Calgary or Edmonton home game and the signal is originating from Canada, the image looks better than any of the games he watches that are being played in the U.S. Brighter, clearer, and the colors just seem to pop more. Do we know why? He's not just imagining that, right? That's a good one. I don't know. I think it's the cool, crisp air keeps all the electronics cool and working.
No, it's the fact that in Canada we care about hockey, and in the US, most of the places really don't. It's the cameras. Honestly, it's straight up. It's the cameras,
and probably the allocated bandwidth, the bit rate that they use.
They just don't invest in the top end equipment and all that in most of the arenas. Like if you're in New York watching the Rangers, fantastic equipment, but they care about the New York Rangers in New York. So, they have excellent equipment that looks every bit as good as the Canadian broadcast, but all the Canadian arenas, we've outfitted them with pretty much the best cameras, 1080p, but pretty much the best cameras that we've got. Also, our Canadian camera operators are just plain better than almost all of the American arenas. They know how to follow the action for a way that looks really good.
Boy, there's so much difference in sports coverage and the quality of the picture.
Really is.
I was talking about college football earlier. There are so many college games every week, and there's so many ESPN 18 and 35 channels, that the lesser popular games, smaller teams, they'll literally just be blurry. It just looks like a DVD.
So many of the NHL games that I watch that are coming from the States, they don't get to use the same cameras as, like, if they share between the NBA and the NHL, they have different setups. The NHL cameras, they're relegated to being way up in the rafters. The players are super far away, and the camera operators are still like struggling to follow the puck. So it's on a technical level, Gary. You're not imagining that, but go watch a Rangers game and you'll notice that it looks every bit as good as the Canadian broadcast.
So it's real. Like for instance, NFL football in the States here, Sunday Night Football, which broadcasts on NBC, which is 1080i. They're using their best cameras. It's got a higher resolution signal. It looks fantastic compared to if you're watching Monday Night Football on ESPN at 720p.
Right.
It looks like Dookie, and the graphics are better on NBC. Right. So anyway, moving on to another question. William is remodeling his dedicated theater room to add a false wall with an acoustically transparent screen, new speakers, and new paint and lighting. Neato. What paint should he use now that he will have a projection setup? Should it be black and or neutral gray? Could he go with any customizable paint and just tell them to use the same number across the 3 RGB values to make perfectly neutral gray at whatever shade he prefers? Now, I assume he's asking just what to paint the walls.
No.
Yeah, I mean...
Maybe the trim as well. Could be.
Yeah, I don't know if, I mean, just a personal preference. I don't think I'd want a black room.
I mean,
that's intense,
that
man.
is
That
the
is
ideal for a projection setup. Is a flat, reflectionless black everywhere. I mean, on a pure strict, there is no stray light hitting the screen except for what the projector sends, right?
You could get some of that Vanta black, expensive
Right. Oh,
like
sure,
nanotube particles, and then
That's
like
right.
put up a bunch of non-reflective surfaces, and it would just be a sensory deprivation chamber.
Pretty much. I mean,
and you would just walk in and fall asleep.
Ideally, that's what you have, but more realistically, yeah, I mean, if you can, stick with neutral gray. Make the trim black. If you can, absolutely do those things. It does help. Every bit of light that is not from the projector,
right,
that makes its way back onto the screen, compromises the ultimate image that you're seeing. All the light off that projection screen has to be reflected, so the closer you can get to the only light hitting that screen being the projector's light, the better. But also, any light that does end up reflecting off of your walls and ceiling and making its way back onto the screen, if it is tinted in a color, it does bias your eye so that you aren't perceiving the colors completely accurately. Now, gray is a very still in style color. There's very few designers and decorators who would balk at you saying, I want this room to be gray. They're like, yeah, that's fine. It's in style right now. I would go with a neutral gray. Now, not everybody's base white where you start is the exact same shade of white from brand to brand.
Oh, that's true.
So you can't just necessarily go say, oh yeah, make all the RGB values of the tints that you put in exactly the same and necessarily end up with perfectly neutral gray. Would Tom worry about that one iota? Absolutely not. But since there is a widely available, affordable brand that gets it right with some of the colors that are already named for them, go with Sherwin-Williams. They have their series. It's the 707 series. So there's like 707-1, 707-2, and so on. Just getting darker as the very last number gets higher. The 707-1, they call it gray screen. And it is an exceedingly neutral gray. And then as you go further down, 707-2 and 3 and so on, it just gets darker and darker in that shade of very neutral gray. So I don't see any reason to not do that. It's not like Sherwin-Williams is hard to find or massively expensive or something. And it's like, it's done. You're done. You don't have to worry about it.
Yeah, I'd be shooting for something like a 75% gray.
Sure. Yeah. I went for something that was around there. Mine, I think, was named Software. There's Web Gray is like the one shade darker than that. So somewhere in that range. I will just mention, as far as the finish goes, Sherwin-Williams calls their most matte finish, they just call it flat. They actually have a finish called matte, which is like one step shinier than flat, although still very, very matte. Both of those are the type of thing where if you even brush it with a shirt sleeve accidentally as you walk by, you'll probably see it in the finish. So I went for the finish, which is one step above what they call matte, which they call velvet, and I have been very happy with that finish. It is not shiny at all. It's not even eggshell, right? Eggshell.
I was about to say eggshell is one I used recently,
which is fine. I mean, eggshell is fine. Velvet is one step below that, and I've been very happy with that velvet finish. It's not so prone to even the slightest breathe on it and it changes shade as the flat.
So it's not like
is.
a chalkboard.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah, but it's
I'm kind of with Tom on this. Is like, don't lose your mind.
No, don't lose your mind. But...
And Tom's home theater, I sat and enjoyed the hell out of a movie,
and it's red.
In his home, and it's red.
That's right.
I couldn't tell any difference whatsoever. So don't go nuts. Just get a good, darker black.
I always throw out that Sherwin-Williams because it's easy to find and it's affordable. So why not?
I enjoy movies every day in a room that was painted with Walmart paint.
Yeah.
So it's perfectly fine. What's the best color temperature for lighting? Well, if you're going to turn it all off to watch movies, it doesn't matter. But television's 6,500K, right?
Yeah, 6,500 Kelvin. That is what you want to get.
Daylight lights.
And if you want to buy some that are tuned to exactly that, they are a little bit more expensive than if you just go find some, LEDs off of Amazon or something. But there's a company called Ideal Loom. All right. And we'll have the link for them at avrant.com. But if you just search for Ideal Loom, they've got LED and fluorescent lights that are tuned to exactly 6,500 Kelvin. So there you go.
Now, William's next question is great. Is it even worth stressing over the paint and light color temperatures? No. Is that just a rabbit hole or a first world problem? Yes.
Well, it's certainly a first world problem.
Yeah.
It can be a rabbit hole if you want it to be. But I mean, I just gave two pretty easy, affordable, and
Very,
widely
yeah.
available options to handle both
Absolutely.
without much muss or fuss. So
Yeah. Like if it's a 10-year-old girl's room that's hot pink, okay, that you're going to see something. That's fine. But if it's beige, gray, anything in that realm, and your lighting, again, aren't you turning the lights off to
Yeah,
watch the
yeah.
movie? So who cares? Get whatever lights you like.
And
And
for
when
most
you go
people,
to a theater, yeah.
we're used to much warmer
Yeah.
light. So when you see 6,500 Kelvin lights, you're like,
it looks
this
blue.
looks
Yeah.
a bit weird, but yeah, once you get
Yeah.
used to it, it is the most neutral light you could use. So yeah, there you go.
Right. I'm lighting myself right now with something in the 5,500
Exactly.
Kelvin. That's what's hitting me right now. So that's why I look dead. He has a window on a side wall that will limit how far forward his false wall can go. He can have the false wall 18 inches in front of the physical front wall or less. His front runner for new speakers are the new Ascend Acoustics Sierra 2EX, which are about 11 inches deep and rear ported. So will 18 inches behind the acoustically transparent screen be enough space? Could he go less than 18 inches with those preferred 11-inch deep speakers rear ported?
That's right.
I'd want a little more depth, I would think.
Well, this is okay.
Okay.
You don't need more. So let's just work it right out. You want 2 inches from the front of the speaker to the actual acoustically transparent screen.
Okay.
So 18 minus 2. We're at 16 right now. Now the speaker is 11 inches deep.
So we got 5.
So we got 5 inches left. Now 5 inches from the rear port to a bare front wall. You might go, ideally you'd have a little bit more space, but this is behind an acoustically transparent screen. You throw some insulation on that wall.
Just put tons,
I mean, you could
quilts
put
back there.
4-inch. You could put 4-inch thick insulation. You don't even have to cover it and make it look pretty because it's all being hidden by your false wall. So you put some 4-inch thick insulation there. Yeah, there's 1 inches between the rear port and the insulation, but that's okay.
So what? Yeah.
And everything is great. So
Yeah.
that's fine. I probably wouldn't shrink it to less than 18 inches, though, because we just worked out those numbers. I mean, I guess you could go 2-inch thick insulation and it's still only a 1-inch gap, and that would be okay. So maybe you could get down to 16 inches from the physical front wall to the front of the false wall.
But since he can have 18, I'd go ahead and leave it there.
It's that much more comfortable, but it's fine. You're okay.
Will the Sierra 2EX be able to play at full reference volume when paired with a Denon X4500H? He's planning to sit about 10 feet away. I'm going to go ahead and guess yes.
Yep.
But I assume you've done the calculations.
Yeah. So the Sierra 2EX, they are 86 dB efficient at 1 watt, which is very standard. They can handle a maximum of 300 watts peak. So the answer is yes. You can hit full reference volume.
Absolutely. Only 10 feet away, especially. For his surrounds, he was thinking he'd go with the Ascend Sierra Luna speakers, which are about 6 inches deep and meant to be wall mounted. His door is on his back wall, and then he has a bar area with a bar top and stools. I'm going to hang out there. Sounds great. Then a sofa in front of that. So he has to walk around all that to get to his seats. His room isn't very wide, so he only has about 2 feet from the sides of the sofa to his side walls. If he follows Dolby's speaker placement, will it be problematic having the Sierra Luna sticking out 6 inches on each side wall? Getting there.
It's getting there. I mean, make them visible if you can. You don't want to run your head into that. Head will, in this case, your head will take more damage than the speakers because they are made out of laminated bamboo, which is stronger than steel. So
what?
It is.
Is it really?
It is. So your head will be taking the damage more than the speaker will. But I mean, what I would probably recommend is don't follow Dolby's strict guidelines of having them literally 90 degrees to the sides of your sofa. They can be a little bit back. I mean, even within Dolby's guidelines, 110 inches from dead ahead center. So that's a little ways back. I would probably do that because that
degrees.
Yeah, 110 degrees to the left and right of dead ahead center. So a little ways back. I would recommend doing that because that'll kind of put the speaker just between the very back of your sofa and where those bar stools are. And that should give you, enough room that, you're kind of moving your head around it a little bit, but it should be okay.
Maybe put a little glow strip on the bottom of that speaker or something like that. How scary is it? I'm still
LED.
freaking out that bamboo can be stronger than steel.
Laminated bamboo. No.
I know, but still, that's crazy. How strong are pandas? Wow.
That's not laminated.
still, that's kind of amazing. Scary animals. Do we have any suggestions for different speakers that would still be neutral and transparent? He's looked around and found some very thin on-wall speakers, but none of them seem to extend low enough for an 80 hertz crossover, and he isn't sure if any of them would stack up to the Ascend Sierra speakers with their raw ribbon tweeters. He doesn't want to use in-wall speakers, so any ideas? I believe you have an RBH recommendation.
Yeah, I mean, if that's what you're going for, it would be RBH would be the alternative here. Also, you could end up using RBH's large signature series on-wall speakers at the front of your room and actually have them mounted on your front wall behind your false wall. So there, if you're like, I really would prefer to have less than 18 inches, that would be one way to accomplish that.
Okay.
Right, is going with RBH on-walls, but the RBHs are more expensive. They're more expensive than the Ascend Sierra 2EX and the Sierra Lunas. So if you're willing to increase the cost, there is an alternative available. RBH's signature on-walls and their Ultra One on-walls could be your surrounds and be very, very skinny. But they are more expensive. Similarly, I could mention Legacy Audio. Legacy Audio would be another one where they have on-wall options. They have the Pixel, which is the small one, and they have their Silhouette, which is the big one, but again, more expensive than the Ascend. So if you're the combination of all of these factors and price, the Ascend still win, and I think you're on the right track.
If you can keep from clocking your head into those stronger than steel speakers, I would still stick with it. That's what I would do. Yeah. Let's move on to Lior. I hope I am saying that right. Lior has a Denon X4400H. He's running a 5.1.2 setup with top middle speakers. The only source plugged into the receiver is a Blu-ray player. He's happy with his Odyssey setup, and he pretty much always uses the same master volume level. He decided to start using the DTS Neural X up mixer rather than just playing back DTS HD master audio soundtracks in DTS HD MA listening mode, which left his top middle speakers silent. When he played Spider-Man Far From Home, the 1080p Blu-ray with a 7.1 DTS HD master audio soundtrack, he got a weird glitch where the volume was at least 10 decibels louder than he's used to. Pausing the movie and then hitting play again or switching listening modes and then back to Neural X fixed the issue. He thought it was maybe a one-time anomaly, and indeed he doesn't seem to be able to reliably reproduce this increased volume glitch, but it has happened 2 more times with different movies, always with 7.1 DTS HD master audio soundtracks. It doesn't happen every time, and again, if he pauses and then plays or switches listening modes, it's fine. Any ideas what's going on? Because I ain't got no idea. Something's going on in that receiver.
Yeah, that I don't know. I don't know the cause of that. It's not a common problem I've heard a lot of people speak about. I am straight up as befuddled as you are, Lior. I don't know what is causing that. And when you can't reliably reproduce it and it doesn't happen every time with the same movie that you're playing, it's really tough to nail down what the heck is going on there.
Is there some sort of firmware update thing that could happen here?
There have been firmware updates, but I'm at a loss. I don't know what's causing that. So,
that's just good old-fashioned weird.
It is.
Just hit pause and play again. Sometimes problems are just like, oh, well, I have to hit pause and then play again. I don't know. That is something going on in that receiver, though. He has more questions. The only thing that has been suggested to him is to do a full factory reset, but he doesn't want to lose all of his Odyssey settings. He does have the Odyssey Editor app, which gives him options to save and load his Odyssey configuration. He also has a full config.avr backup file that he created in 2018 after he got it all set up just the way he wanted. But he has since updated the receiver's firmware. There we go. Okay, I should have read ahead. So which method is better if he wants to restore his Odyssey and other settings after a full factory reset? Well, you could do both. I mean,
both and find out. So if I'm not mistaken, because there was one year where, so what you used to be able to do with Den and AVRant's receivers was log into them via a web browser, right? You just put in the receiver's IP address, and you would actually get a whole web interface, and you could change all the settings in there, and save that configuration onto your laptop and then load it back on.
Oh, neat. Okay.
Then when the Odyssey Editor app came out, they took away that web interface for 1 year, and then they brought it back the next year. And I'm pretty sure it was the 4400 series that lost that web interface. Because the 4300 got the Odyssey Editor app after it came out. It was an add-on. And then the 4500, I just looked at that manual and they mentioned the web interface again. So
the 4400 can get it back, or
no? The 4400 is the one that didn't have
can't have it.
Yeah, didn't have the web interface. I'm pretty sure that was the one model year where it was missing that feature. People cried out about it and they brought it back with the 4500, as I recall. I might be wrong about that. So how he got that config.avr file, I'm thinking might have been a third-party way of getting that, because there were other ways of doing it, but I'm thinking that's the situation. I might be wrong about all of that, but I think that's the situation. Now, the Odyssey Editor app gives you a pretty simple way to save your Odyssey configuration and load it from the app, and it's actually the way that a lot of people, since Odyssey doesn't give you like multiple different configurations that you can change at the press of a button. That's one of the complaints that some people have about it. The Odyssey Editor app is the easiest way to do that. So, in your situation where you have this glitch that we can't quite figure out, and we don't know if it's related to firmware, or we don't know if it's related to some other setting somehow, I would probably recommend doing the Odyssey Editor app version of it, because that only applies to Odyssey. But that's the most important one. That's the one that takes all the time to do all of your measurements and all of that type of stuff. So I would probably do it there, because I kind of want you to lose all of the other settings and just redo them manually. Like, you know, just the setup part of the AV receiver, as opposed to the Odyssey part. I kind of want you to go through that and do that again manually, because we don't know where this glitch is coming from.
Right. A full reset does sound like the only possible
the reasonable
option
thing to
here.
do.
Yeah.
And as far as the time consuming and measurement part and everything, you can still save that via the Odyssey Editor app and easily load it again. So that would be my suggestion on that case.
Yeah. So basically, Lior needs to weigh the annoyance of hitting pause and play again.
Right.
How often is that happening versus a factory reset, and then you get through all that and it still does it. Oh, wouldn't that be? Oh,
yeah, because you reloaded everything exactly the way it was. Yeah, it's a little.
I don't know. So, just how bad is it?
Yeah,
and then do the factory reset with the app settings. Okay, moving on to Stefan B. Here we go, Stefan B. What's the best budget 75-inch TV? We've talked about them already.
I will refer you back to Sean W's question. I mean, he was asking about perhaps larger than 75, but we pretty much ended up talking about just 75-inch TVs. And yeah, it'll be the so some people might be saying, why aren't you recommending, Rob, the new TCL 625 series that just came out? Why aren't you saying those instead of the 615 series that was already out last year? Well, because there is no 75-inch size in the new 625 series. They have reserved the 75-inch series for their new 8 series models, the TCL 825 that just came out. So as far as 75-inch TVs go, pretty hard to beat the TCL. It's the cheapest and it checks all the boxes, but it's the panel uniformity. If it's anything that you're going to complain about, it's the panel uniformity.
I just don't like TCL TV.
And being a native 60 hertz panel, those would be the two things to quibble about with the TCL. The Vizio P series, I would probably point most people to the new 2019 Vizio P series Quantum. $1,600 for the 75-inch in that one. Does all the things. And again, the little bit of banding that shows up once in a while, that is they don't have a debanding filter in the Vizios. That would be the one thing that people sometimes complain about. And then the one to not completely overlook is Samsung's RU8000 series. Once again, edge lit, no Dolby Vision, not very bright for HDR, but better panel uniformity if that's your number one consideration.
Right. Okay, there you go. Dan C. Dan recently asked us which Yamaha receivers would allow him to use 4 overhead Atmos speakers. We let him know that the flagship A3000 series, like the current RX A3080, are the only Yamaha models that can do a full 11 speaker 7.2.4 configuration. But if he is okay with 9 speakers in a 5.2.4 setup, then the A2000 series, like the current RX A2080, can do that. So Dan is back to say that he is not using surround back speakers, so 5.1.4 is fine in his case. He just wants to make sure he can have 4 overhead speakers. But now he isn't dead set on it being Yamaha. Okay. Now that he's looking at other receiver brands, he's finding it a bit overwhelming and confusing. What's the easiest way to tell if a receiver can do 5.1.4? Could we just provide him with a list? Could we shop for him, Rob? Can we just tell him what to get?
Well, I kind of can give you a list without it being ridiculous, so that I will do that. If you are trying to do this research on your own, it isn't the simplest thing.
No, it's
unfortunately.
Not. It's frustrating.
If the receiver is actually labeled as a 9.1 or a 9.2 receiver, if that's in the description of the model, then you're pretty darn safe. Because if they label it that, it means it actually has 9 amplifiers built in. I mean, ironically, the A3080, the flagship Yamaha, is labeled in their lineup as a 9.2 receiver because it has 9 amplifiers built in, but then you can add another 2 speakers to it. The A2080 in Yamaha's lineup is also labeled as a 9.2 receiver because it has 9 amplifiers built in, but you cannot add 2 more speakers to that one. Only the 3080 can have 2 more speakers added to it. So if you're looking at receiver models and it says this is a 9.2 receiver, you're pretty darn safe in your case. It can do 5.1.4. But it isn't always that way, and there are some that are labeled as a 7.2 because they have 7 amplifiers built in, but they can be expanded. And so if you carefully read through the spec sheet, some of them mention, this has 7 amplifiers, but it can process 9 speakers. Some of them outright say that, like Marantz do. But not always. So then you're relegated to reading through the manual and looking at the amplifier assign section of the manual, where it will hopefully detail that for you.
Nothing like digging through a dozen PDFs while you're trying to pick a receiver, right?
But if you're just trying to shop in a store, that's overwhelming and confusing. I don't blame you. So here is the list that I will give you, all right? So for Yamaha, if it's an RXA 2040 or a higher number than that, all right? So 2050, 60, 70, up to the 80, or a 3000, 40, 50, 60. They all do it. There, that's Yamaha. For Onkyo, if you're in the TXNR series and it is a 787 or a higher number than that, it'll do it. Or if you're in Onkyo's lineup looking at the RZ series, if it's an RZ 630 or a higher number than that, it'll do it. Marantz's lineup, pretty easy. If you're the SR 6010 or a higher number than that, it'll do it. And in Denin's lineup, if you're an X4300H or a higher number than that, you'll be able to do it. But there are 2 exceptions.
2 exceptions.
If you go a year before that, there was the 7200 WA. It was the flagship at the time. It was the only one at the time that could do it. Otherwise, you're looking for a 300 at the end of the number.
Or higher.
And then the other one exception is the brand new X3600H. Not the 35, not the 34 or anything lower. The 3600 is the first time that the 3000 series has been able to do more than 7 speakers. So that's the list.
That's the list. Well, there you go. You did give him a list. I didn't think that would be so easy. Excellent. Let's move on to Leighton. Leighton is using AVRant Veris Grand front, left, right, and center speakers. Then he's using Paradigm Monitor version 2 series speakers everywhere else. Titan version 2 front heights, ADP surrounds, and another pair of Titan version 2 surround backs. The foam surround going around the perimeter of the woofers of his surround back Titan V2 speakers is starting to fall apart. He contacted Paradigm and they said they could do a repair, but it would cost $155 plus shipping. That seems a bit expensive to Leighton. Yeah, it does. Given that he is already using a mix of AVRant and Paradigm speakers, and given that his other Paradigm speakers might have degrading foam woofer surrounds too, do we think it's worth seeking out a repair, or is it time to just buy something else? Would the very inexpensive Pioneer Andrew Jones speakers be a decent timbre match with what he's already using? I I would say once things start disintegrating, it is a reasonable time to buy some new things.
So, I mean, the thing is, back when it's pretty rare to find the foam surround. So we're talking about if you're looking at the speaker and you're looking at the drivers of the speaker and the larger one, the woofer that's built into the speaker, there's something around the perimeter of that attaches the cone that moves back and forth to the case, the cabinet of the speaker. Most often these days it's rubber, some kind of rubber surround, but they used to use foam. And that was the case. This is 15 years ago we're talking about these speakers. Right. Now, foam did degrade. It's a known thing. You can buy DIY foam repair kits. That's something you could attempt to dabble with if you want to.
That's cheap.
It's cheap. It's not the easiest, and it's certainly not the cleanest thing to do. And it's not difficult to screw up. If you're like, you know what, I'm going to end up trashing these speakers anyway if I don't do this, and I just want to try it as a project. By all means, go ahead. You can order them off of Amazon. Foam surround repair kit is all you're looking for, and you could absolutely do that. Also, any speaker repair shop can do this, and it will probably be cheaper than shipping it to Paradigm and paying the fee that they're asking. I mean, maybe not. Some places aren't that cheap anymore because speaker repair places aren't necessarily all that common anymore, actual brick and mortar places.
I'm telling you what, I wouldn't know where to take a pair of speakers for repair, especially in my dinky little town here of 100,000 people. We don't have anything. Maybe I could drive to Atlanta.
Right.
But
maybe. I mean, that is something that any speaker repair shop would be able to do. So if you're in a big city and you have one, I mean, I'd inquire, because if it's a reasonable price, why not? But yeah, if you're going to end up replacing the speakers altogether, okay, so the Pioneer Andrew Jones speakers, I love them. I mean, I think they're fantastic budget entry-level speakers, better than just about anything else. They are pretty darn neutral. I certainly, as surround backs, I wouldn't find them offensive at all. I mean,
seems appropriate.
Aperion speakers and Paradigm speakers are both known for being neutral speakers, and surround backs and front heights. I mean, I care even less about front heights than I do about surround backs. They're not small. The Pioneer Andrew Jones bookshelf speakers are not tiny, but then again, you're coming from Titans, which were not tiny bookshelf speakers in Paradigm's lineup either. If you were coming from the Atoms, I might warn you that the Pioneers are bigger than the Atoms, but you were at the Titans, so the Paradigm, the Pioneers rather are, the Pioneer Andrew Jones speakers.
The Pioneer.
I think they're smaller than the Titans, so you're probably okay on that front. So yeah, I mean, I could give a thumbs up to that. If you wanted an even closer timbre match, I mean, why not stick with Aperion, because you're already using them up front. You could go to their Intimus series, right? You could take a step down in price. I mean, if you're willing to pay the price, you could stick with the Vera speakers, but you could also go down to the Intimus series. But, pound for pound, the Pioneer Andrew Jones are still less expensive. So if this is purely about price, I say that's for surround backs and front heights. I would say that's fine
for those specific positions. Get those.
You know what I might do if your Paradigm ADPs also have foam surrounds that are starting to degrade. I'd maybe go with Aperion speakers for just the side surrounds, but for the backs and the front heights, the Pioneers are fine.
Okay, gotcha. Put the money where it makes the most difference, right? All right, Adam G. in Australia. Adam says he considers himself a novice as far as audio goes, but he loves watching movies and he loves great surround sound, so he's gradually getting into it more and more, and he partially blames us for him getting carried away with it. No, there's no such thing as carried away. There's just enthusiasm. His wife has to tolerate his home theater plans now. That happens. They are renovating, and he will have a room that can be semi-dedicated to being a theater. It can't be pitch black all the time, so he's thinking he'd like to have a flat panel mounted on the wall and then have a motorized projection screen that can come down in front of it. That's a common arrangement. The room is roughly 13 feet wide by 16 and a half feet long. The doorway is near a corner on one of the longer walls. On the opposite long wall, there's a long window. On the short wall closest to the door, there are two skinny windows, and the final short wall is blank. He considered putting the TV and roll-down projection screen on the blank wall, but they would like to have, let me back up, but they would like to have a fairly wide L-shaped couch. And if the couch is facing the blank wall, the door would either be directly beside or behind the couch, and there really wouldn't be enough room to walk around the couch. So he's thinking he'll face the short wall with the two skinny windows. There's enough room in between the two skinny windows to mount the flat panel TV, and then the projector screen can just roll down in front of all of it. Do we agree that this is the best layout? Given your priority of the couch, probably so. I don't see anything wrong with it. As long as you can control the light around, you don't want to be staring into daylight as you're trying to watch television. My uncle used to have a home set up just like this. The TV was right in between two bright windows. And every time you watch TV, you were squinting. What is that? What? I can't. So as long as you control the light well.
Yeah, I mean, layout-wise, this looks good to me. What you would want to make sure, I mean, as Lee just alluded to, make sure that you can really black out those skinny windows that are going to be on either side. I mean, hopefully you can black out the long window that'll be on what will become your left wall as well.
Right, you're going to need to do some serious light control here to really enjoy it.
For projection, you want to make sure that that is really nicely blacked out. But I mean, there are all kinds of ways to black out your window, so that's not something that is going to preclude you from setting up the room this way. And given where the door is, I totally think that makes sense.
I think that's your best arrangement. Absolutely. Just, I mean, like he said, you can get curtains that'll black out enough light.
Oh yeah.
Little shades to pull down. There's all kinds of ways.
If you don't care what you put up some fabric on the actual window so that that's what people see from the outside world.
Yeah.
And then you put a layer of aluminum foil in there, which is 100% opaque, and then just some regular blinds, so that's what you see from the inside, and that will completely black out your window for a really low price.
He's saying it can't be a completely dedicated theater, so I'm guessing that he and the spouse would like to open the windows occasionally.
Sure. But you know what? Some blackout curtains, which honestly, some curtains on either side of this flat panel, like keep the blinds, which he's pictured there, but then some actual blackout curtains that are just over those windows. I mean, aesthetically, that looks like nice. Theater-like, right?
Yeah, it looked great.
There. It would look fantastic.
Yeah, because your curtains will be peeking out of the sides of your drop-down screen. Yeah, it'd be fantastic. I think it's a great idea. Ideally, how far off the back wall should his seats be? He'd like to account for surround back speaker placement and also optimal viewing distance.
Yeah,
so he has given us the. Has he given us the size? Yes.
Yeah, 16 and a half feet long.
Okay.
Now, keep in mind, the flat panel TV is going to have some depth to it, even mounted on the wall. And then the drop-down screen is in front of that. So it's not as though the projection screen is literally his front wall. I'm gonna subtract 1 foot.
At least. Yeah, I'd say a foot or a foot and a half.
That's right. So I'm going to subtract 1 foot, and that's where your screen is. So now, from the back wall to the projection screen, I am going to say is 15 and a half feet, okay? Now, I would suggest in this room sitting 11 feet from the eyes to the screen.
Okay.
So now we got 4.5 feet left behind your seat, right? So if you actually put the back of the seat itself like 4 feet from the physical back wall, and then, there's some distance from the actual back of the seat to your head, to your eyes, I think that'll work out really nicely. And 4 feet from the back wall to the back of your head is about the minimum I would ever suggest if we're going to have surround back speakers. Right? So I think that all works out. You could move the seat even a little bit more forward, even a little bit closer to the screen. Maybe you're 10 feet from eyes to screen, and you have, 5.5 feet from your eyes to the actual back wall, about 5 feet from the back of the couch to the actual wall. But I don't know if aesthetically, layout-wise, that's going to look as nice, but essentially somewhere in the range of 4 to 5 feet from the back wall to the back of your chair.
Yeah, about 4 feet sounds right to me. And that leaves space back there for like a shallow bookshelf and all. I mean, it's a blank wall back there. So
that's right.
All kinds of things can happen back there.
And you can have your acoustic treatment back there too, and it'll be really easy.
Really good. So screen size, he has it in mind that he wants at least 135-inch projection screen. But is that the right choice for this space? This is more trigonometry that Rob loves to do.
I'm going to say that it isn't what I would recommend most highly, given the dimensions of your room and what we just said about where I would have your seat, and the fact that this projection screen is not actually the front wall. It's going to be a foot in front of it, or perhaps even a little bit more.
Too big, yeah.
I would suggest quite strongly going with a 120-inch projection screen.
All
right. So if you are 10 feet or 11 feet from eyes to screen, you are right in that beautiful butter zone of 43 to 47 degree field of view. Right. If you're at 10 and a half feet, you're at the exact 45 degree field of view that I personally prefer, with a 120-inch screen. On top of that, you have your front left right speakers to consider. If you go with a 135-inch screen, which is physically 10 feet wide, and then there are some borders, and this is a drop-down screen, so there's
and how
a
far
tension
down does it
rod
come?
at the bottom. It means your front, left, right speakers are going to be slammed against the side walls.
Yeah.
And I'm not in favor of that. Right. You go with the 120-inch diagonal screen, that's 105 inches from side to side. It gives you just enough room for the front, left, right speakers to sit comfortably.
Especially if they're kind of skinny towers, maybe.
That's right. Yeah. And then on top of that, coming up, he wants to ask about his center speaker. With a 120-inch screen, it doesn't have to be as low to the ground versus a 135-inch, which of course is bigger. So all of those things together, I'm going to quite strongly recommend to you going with a 120-inch screen.
There you go. His wife wants a clean look, as do a lot of people. And that includes a nice TV cabinet type stand up front to hold all the equipment. I'm guessing in between the windows. Adam was thinking his center speaker could go in there and be angled upward. The lower placement would allow the center speaker to remain below the projection screen when it comes down. But should he have the center speaker positioned higher and then be forced to use an acoustically transparent screen? I'm going to say no. I don't think, to me, it does not make enough difference.
And just going with that last answer, if you go with the 120-inch, I think you'll be very okay.
Yeah.
You could make that TV stand maybe a little bit taller so that it's not so far below the flat panel. Because again, with the slightly smaller screen, it's not quite as tall as the 135 you were thinking. Yeah, I like this idea overall. I don't think this is a case where I'm going to be like stamping my foot and saying, pay all the extra money to get the acoustically transparent screen.
No, I would not.
Going with the 120, going with the 120 solves a lot of problems for you here.
Yeah, absolutely. He was thinking he would like the Epson TW9400 projector. That's the 5050 UB.
Yep.
But it's a bit expensive for the budget they have in mind. The TW9300, the 5040 UB, is more affordable. So what would he be missing out on if he gets the 9300/5040 UB? And should he consider the even less expensive BenQ W2700/HT3550?
So once again, we're repeating ourselves a bit here because
we talked about
this early in the podcast. So I'll just reiterate, please go back and listen to the previous answer for the full details. But the 5050 UB gets the full 18 gigabits per second, and it gets the easier to adjust HDR. Those are really the features you're going for. So if you are a heavy gamer and you want to use this for 4K at 60 frames per second with HDR, the 5040 UB cannot do that. So that would be the main reason. And if you want to adjust HDR on the fly, it's just easier on the 5050 UB. In your case, I wouldn't be going down even more to the BenQ. While the BenQ does allow you to do 4K 60 with HDR at a lower price point, it has not great lag. So if your top priority is gaming, the Epsons just don't have the latency that the BenQ does, so that kind of ends up being. I mean, maybe you set your Xbox One to output 1080 resolution at 60 frames per second with HDR, and then there you go.
See, there are times in my mind when it makes sense to push the budget. There are certain places and items, and if you're starting from scratch on a projector, push it and get that TW9400/5050.
If gaming is the really big priority, because if it's not, if all you ever watch is 24 frames per second movies, then
but again, there exist these 60 frame per second things.
Yes, yeah,
that are in HDR.
It's really about the 60 frames at HDR. That's the deciding factor.
Let me tell you, I've seen some content that was HDR 4K 60 frames per second, and it is amazing. And I'd rather be able to watch that than not.
Well, and there you go. For Lee, it's decided.
For me, it's the more expensive one. I just
But then there's all the other niceties, the motorized lenses, the oodles of zoom range and lens shift that the Epsons offer you that the BenQ doesn't have.
Right.
I'll say stick with either of the Epsons, but yeah, it's about the 60 hertz HDR. That's the deciding factor. Because
I'm thinking at some point we're going to get sports in 60 frames per second.
And Ang Lee's movies, which we're going to talk about next if you can stick around.
I can. We're good for a little while longer.
Okay.
Anyway, we got a couple of more questions. He was planning on having 2 subwoofers, but could he get away with just one in the back corner? Well, I mean, you can get away with it, and you might enjoy it a whole lot. It depends on what you mean by get away. Now, never forget that multiple subwoofers are for uniformity, so that the bass sounds the same everywhere in the room. It doesn't mean the bass sounds bad in places in the room. It's just not quite as uniform. So some frequencies be a little louder in some seats or quieter in some seats. So, if you have like daddy's favorite seat in the middle.
And that's the only one you care about for some reason. Yep.
So, but for me, I'd spend the money on the projector and get one subwoofer for now. That to me, that's my priorities, because the lack of uniformity, it's such a crapshoot in different houses and different places. And wait and see what problems you have there first and how much you hate it. But I'd rather have the one good subwoofer and a little bit of uniformity problem and have the more expensive projector.
I'm hoping that by going with the slightly smaller and not acoustically transparent screen, that maybe I saved him enough money to already go with the top end projector.
Right.
Because they've gone for this fairly large seating area that seems to be a priority. And I'm like, maybe you are the only person who cares about the bass sounding nice and even, because one sub can work for one seat pretty nicely. You've got the entire back wall to work with. So doing a subwoofer crawl where you put the subwoofer in the one seat that you care about, and then you move yourself along all the positions where the sub could potentially live, and you find where it sounds the most uniform, right? Not a roller coaster when you play a bass sweep, but a pretty even, nice bass sweep. Then for that one seat, that one sub will do quite nicely. But if you want that same uniformity and evenness across all of your seats, and you have this fairly large seating area, then the only way to do that is with more than one sub. So coming up next, we're going to talk about what kind of sub he needs, and maybe that'll allow him to afford 2 right away, and the nicer projector.
If there is going to be a second subwoofer at the front of the room, it has to fit somehow with the long, low TV cabinet. Should the TV cabinet be not so wide so that the subwoofer can sit beside it, or would it be okay to have space within the TV cabinet to house the subwoofer? Would the sub need to be front ported or sealed in that case? Well, also don't forget to think outside the box. The subwoofers don't have to be perfectly symmetrical front and back. They could be side, like front side, back left side, front right side kind of thing.
He doesn't have a lot of space to his sides, though, with that couch. Right. So, here's the thing. Your room, you got a door, so you can close this room. It's only 16 and a half by 13. You are under 2,000 cubic feet by quite a hefty margin. Even if you've got a 9-foot ceiling, you are under 2,000 cubic feet. You do not need mega subs in this room to fully pressurize all the way down to 20 hertz. Now, in Australia, I don't know, the affordability of SVS in particular there. There are certainly other options, but to get a nice, competent, can play down to 20 hertz sealed sub is entirely doable.
That's right.
And so I would say go sealed here. If you do that, what you don't want is a cavity in that front TV cabinet with like significant space around the sub so that the sound can get back there and do so. If you do that, you'd want to line everything with insulation.
I just don't like the sound of that, both figuratively and literally.
Right.
Because you're also vibrating everything in the cabinet.
Sure. But if it's a nice, cozy cubby for that sub, sealed sub, and yes, put insulation in there so that, you don't have just literal resonance inside of the cavity of the TV cabinet area, but you put some insulation in there, and then you put your sealed sub in there. That is fine. That's not going to affect anything as far as the performance of the sub goes. And you can definitely go sealed in this room, given the size.
Yeah, absolutely. Is this room large enough to even bother with Atmos?
I sure hope so. It's bigger than my room, and I've got Atmos.
Yeah, absolutely. You can do Atmos. It depends on how much you care about it. At least 2 on the ceiling.
Oh, 4. You got to go 2. You got to go 4.
You got to go 4. Okay, if you're starting from scratch, sure.
Sorry, I forgot. Was this a brand new house or they're renovating it?
I think he said he's renovating, right? Didn't he?
Right. So
renovating. So maybe you got an opportunity.
Maybe in-ceiling speakers are an option. If you're already doing a renovation, that would, visually it's completely hidden. So yeah, space isn't the concern whatsoever. You could absolutely do in-ceiling Atmos speakers here. You could also do some really skinny on-ceiling speakers if you wanted to. Like Kef's T-Series. They make great, super skinny,
Oh, no.
and you can get them in white. They blend right into your ceiling.
If we're renovating, I'm putting 4 in-ceiling speakers in. Why not?
Sure.
And plus, as we've already said in this podcast and previous ones, they don't have to be the highest end speakers in the world.
And since we're telling you to have your seat 4 to 5 feet off the back wall, you can actually have in-ceiling speakers that are still a foot away from your back wall, but within that 3 to 5 feet range behind you. You can call them top rears. And then you put your in-ceiling top front speakers. I'd say, go 4 or 5 feet in front of you. Yeah, it's a wonderful Atmos setup.
There you go. And send us pictures as it goes on, because I'm curious now.
Yeah,
it sounds good.
I'll go ahead and say, all right, we're gonna cut the questions there for this week.
Okay.
Because Lee already asked last week. You posted on our Facebook page over at avrant.com or facebook.com/AVRant Podcast, and I went and saw it specifically. It was only in theaters for 1 week in the format. They booted it out of the theaters quickly, and that is Ang Lee's Gemini Man, which stars Will Smith. And so, okay, I'll just say as far as the movie goes, don't hate it. It's not like I hated the movie or something like that, but it's also like, it was basically neither here nor there. I'm like, all of these ideas have been done before.
I mean, the concept is kind of cool, I get it.
It's fine, but I mean, there's nothing new under the sun as far as the plot, or there's really, I mean, it's quite a simplistic story. Like,
right.
The bad guys are bad, the good guys are good, and there's not really any twists or turns.
So this clone, did the clone start as a baby and grow up to age 20 something?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think.
So they didn't form it in a vat.
Well, because he's younger than Will Smith.
I'm just saying, because a lot of clone concepts have them where you're just sort of grown as an adult.
It seems that he was born and raised. So in any case, forget about the movie plot, because what we want to talk about are the technical details, and that's all that I really was watching the movie for, and why I raced out on the final Thursday when it was still in the high frame rate theaters. There was only a few of them that were playing it in high frame rate.
Lucky you.
Our IMAX theaters, we have 2 IMAX theaters in the Vancouver area. Only one of them was showing in high frame rate, and they only showed it for opening day. After that, they're like, no more high frame rate in this IMAX theater. So it was a short run.
Why? This is what I can't understand. How is it any more trouble to show it in the high frame rate?
Because they're running 2 projectors. So it actually costs more to show it in high frame rate.
Oh, okay. All right. So one for each eye because it was 3D?
It's 3D and in high frame rate, and they have to use the full frame rate of each projector to run the 3D.
Right. Now, the one you saw, okay, so the movie is shot in 120 frames per second.
That's
3D, right? Now, is that 120 frames for each eye?
That's right.
The original shooting? So he shot it. Yeah. Wow. Holy cow.
Yeah.
Now, yeah, I mean, who in the world can even show that? Were there any theaters outside of Hollywood itself that could show 120 frames per second for each eye?
There weren't even any in Hollywood.
Yeah.
There were some theaters outside of North America. There were a couple in South Korea, and I'm forgetting where. There were a couple of theaters around the world that could actually. So not only 2 cameras, each camera running at 120 frames per second, so 120 frames per second per eye, and the cameras were higher than 4K resolution, but the whole movie was finished at 4K resolution. Okay. So in North America, the Dolby cinemas, the AMC Dolby cinemas, there were 14 of them, they could show it at 120 frames per second in 3D, but at 2K resolution, not at 4K resolution. So they took a resolution downgrade. The IMAX theaters could show it at 4K resolution, 3D, but at 60 frames per second, not 120.
So 60 each eye.
Yeah. So you couldn't get both 4K and 120 frames per second each eye anywhere in North America.
Right.
Now, the theater that I saw it at, it was 2 projectors. It was 3D. But it was 2K resolution and 60 frames per second per eye. So I had a downgrade of both resolution and maximum frame rate. But that was the best I could do. So, because like I say, only one IMAX theater and only for opening night had it at 4K 60 in my area.
I haven't even asked. Maybe I should, but I doubt I can even see it in 2D 2K 60 in this town. I doubt it.
All of the 2D showings in North America were at 24 frames a second.
Yeah. So I bet I can't even see.
In 2D.
I don't even know if you can do a high frame rate in my town. We have one theater
Yeah. So obviously the infrastructure part of this thing was a challenge for this movie, but that wasn't the point. It was like, let's see what can be done in today's technology, right? Ang Lee already did Billy Lynn's Long Halftime Walk, which was similarly shot. And then, of course, we had the Hobbit movies years ago, but those were at 48 frames a second, certainly not 120. So, I mean, the whole thing about this was... So what was it, Lee, that you wanted to ask about this, since you didn't get to see it yourself with your own eyes?
Like, my thing is, I'm a fan of high frame rates. When I shoot my own videos, I do it at 60 frames per second. I'm just a fan. It looks more like life. Life moves smoothly. It just does, right? Life doesn't shmoo along and judder and everything like that, like you can get from 24 frames per second. So I don't know. I've just never, it's my feeling that the people that love 24, you either love it for technical reasons because you can hide your special effects. It takes less processing power to do 24 frames per second, that sort of thing. But mostly people like it because they're used to it. Movies are kind of dreamlike and a little schmooey, and the movement is not like real life. And that's why people like the look of it. I like to simulate real life. So for me, I like 3D. I don't like putting on funky glasses because sometimes I'm watching TV and I want to lay down. I like to lay over on the armrest, and so 3D can be a little exhausting at home, but I like it. I would love to watch a football game in 3D, 60 frames per second. That would be neat. So that's just where I'm coming from. And I'm wondering, you described a little bit about what it was like to watch the movie, and tell us about the things you found good and bad. Sure. And then let me ask you a few more things after you say that.
So I want to start with there are two things coming into this movie for me that sort of, pre-bias me to what I'm about to see, right? One was having seen the Hobbit movies at 48 frames per second and thinking they looked weird in the theater when I saw them
What made you feel weird about it?
Those movies, everything looked like it was sped up just a little.
Wow. Okay.
I mean, that's just what it looked like. It looked like everything was like slightly sped up, and 48 wasn't quite enough.
But surely it wasn't actually sped up. It was being shown at the correct rate.
It wasn't actually sped up, but it looked
felt like it.
Well, first of all, Peter Jackson intentionally moved the camera more quickly than usual because he's like, I'm going to show off what the higher frame rate can do. So I think that lent to some of the feeling that everything had been sped up because the camera was moving more quickly everywhere than it went.
Okay, that would be part of it.
But then it also did that total thing that it looked like a stage play because we are
I've heard people say
in The
that,
Hobbit. We're in a totally fantasy setting, right? And we're on these sets that are clearly sets now, and it looks like you're like a high budget, but it looks like a high budget stage production that I'm watching now, rather than that traditional movie thing. So I wasn't a huge fan of that. I didn't hate it, but I wasn't a huge fan of it. And then, of course, the thing that I do hate is frame interpolation on TVs, where you're turning on the processing that makes up frames that aren't in the signal.
No, I hate that because I don't want to see fake frames.
Right.
If it didn't have that many frames, please don't try to make them.
Sure.
Just show me what it had because that's what's going to look best.
And to me, I hate that. It always looks really weird. So for the people who are like flat out against high frame rate films, they always point to that, the soap opera effect, the frame interpolation. They say everything's going to look like that, and I don't want it to look like that. So those are the things coming in. But
no one wants it to look like that.
Right, but I still went in with an open mind because I'm like, I'm interested in this stuff, and I was prepared that I might hate this. But so when the movie starts and I'm first watching it, and I'm like, yeah, this doesn't look like a movie. This looks like someone shot it with a really high-end camcorder. That's what this looks like now.
A camcorder.
Right? Well, you know what I mean, though, right?
Like, I know what you mean. Yeah, just funny to say camcorder. Yeah,
but versus watching a Hollywood movie versus a homemade video, right? That was shot at 30 or 60 frames per second, and how the motion looks different between those two things. And I'm like, yep, this is like a really good camcorder that this was shot with, right? Now,
I have a camcorder right here. I was reaching for it, but it's plugged in and I can't move it.
The 3D was the clearest 3D I have ever seen. I mean, it was actually shot in 3D. This wasn't post-conversion. This was shot with two separate cameras, the high frame. It was the clearest 3D that I have ever seen. But you get past the motion pretty easily. It looks like real people moving along in the real world. So it doesn't look like a movie. It doesn't have that blur. It doesn't have that slightly separated otherworldly feeling anymore. Now that can be super effective in certain types of scenes because you're like, oh, that's a real person doing a real thing.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, now all of a sudden a simple punch or a push
Uh-huh.
like means more for some reason, because they're like, oh, that's a real person actually getting pushed. It's like, okay, there's that. But
so it affects you viscerally. You see it as a
does.
thing that
Or
really just happened.
me anyway.
Yeah, no, I get it.
But then there's a flip side to that, which is, okay, some of these are traditional movie stunt type stuff. It's a stunt person doing it. It was also easier to tell when it was a stunt person on that motorcycle and not actually Will Smith, because it's so clear. But the stunt people, I'm like, if the stunt person did not go full out when they pulled their kick or their punch a little bit, what you have to do, you're not actually punching the person full out. But now it's clear as day. You can see it. What it really reminded me of, if you ever watch the behind the scenes footage, the making of any movie, and they shot that with like camcorders, right? Not film cameras. Kind of what it looks like now. It kind of looks like a behind the scenes rehearsal of a fight going on.
You know what it reminds me of? When they made the conversion from standard definition to high def TV, and people like the makeup people on TV shows and the set designers, all of a sudden those people are kind of in a panic, because now everything they got used to doing for a certain resolution, all of a sudden you can see every little cakey bit of makeup that they would do before.
And that applies again. It's happening absolutely the case again. Very little makeup on the actors, because there had to be, but they got in fights, they got scrapes and bruises. All of those things are makeup, and that was makeup. And I noticed that even though this movie takes place over the span of, I think, 2 days, maybe it was 3 days, wow, those wounds healed quickly, because I'm pretty sure they were like, we got to take as much makeup off of these people as we can as quickly.
So what we're going to have to do is actually beat the crap out of Will Smith to get the kind of movie we want. I really like Will Smith, actually. I like him.
Another interesting thing. Okay, they shot a lot of this movie in actual backgrounds. They actually went to the locations and went to the real backgrounds. Now, when it's a close-up, it looks completely real. When it's a wide shot, establishing shot, you're seeing the surroundings. Those I loved. I loved those in the high frame rate. Super clear, looks like real life. Really loved that. It was all the mid shots, which is most of the movie, as it is most movies, where they still had the actor in the foreground and the background was a little bit out of focus, right? Completely normal, but now it looks weird. All of a sudden, these real backgrounds look like they're all green screens. Because the green screen, the background, the real back, a little bit out of focus.
Do you know what? I kind of feel you on that, because my new camera, that Sony A6400, this is the first time that I've had what you would call a camcorder making my own videos, where I have a professional lens, so I can get a really wide aperture. I can get this sort of professional looking depth of field. And I think none of us have ever seen, or rarely see, depth of field that looks like a movie camera combined with the frame rate that we relate to camcorders and television. So the combination of 60 frames per second and a shallow depth of field is odd.
It is.
And I can see how it throws on, because you're expecting now, okay, this looks like real life. My eyes want to move around the frame and look at everything that I would normally look at. Like, your eyes can't look at the background if you want to.
And the funny thing was, the stuff that was green screen actually looked a bit more convincing, because they could manipulate the focus and the depth of field to match the actors.
So you think maybe they need to shoot in with more depth of field? Which would be unusual for a movie.
Either more infinite, if it's going to be 3D, more infinite focus, where everything is in 3D, focus, or actually shoot everything on green screen like George Lucas always wanted to do, because you can kind of make it look better. So that was interesting. Now, I wanted to talk about acting.
Yeah, this fascinated me the most. You mentioned that this higher frame rate actually made some actors stand out from other actors.
Completely. Now,
the way they carry themselves and their facial expressions.
Totally noticed that in The Hobbit with Hugo Weaving. Because I was watching that movie and I'm like, everybody here looks like a stage actor doing a stage play. And then Hugo Weaving came on screen in The Hobbit. I'm like, why is he like better than everybody else? It's hard to put your finger on, but for some reason he just had this presence, this commanding presence. And so first of all, I want to say Will Smith overall, very good. And I mean, he's in the movie throughout the whole thing, so he's almost always on screen. Very good. But every once in a while, it just felt a little off. It felt like maybe it could have used a different take, something like that, just a little bit. But then there was Mary Elizabeth Winstead, who was playing the lead female role. And for some reason, it was just easy to watch her in this high frame rate. Nothing seemed out of place. it didn't feel like everything else. Every once in a while, just felt a little bit off. Clive, what's his name?
I don't know anyone's name. I forget it.
Owens?
I can barely remember anything.
Owens? Yeah, Clive Owens, I think.
Okay,
anyway,
whatever.
I mean, very good actor, but some of the scene, I'm like, that feels like he's overacting in the scene. And then there's this one sort of, I forget what government body she's working for, but it totally felt like, unfortunately, all of her scenes had been shot separate from everyone else. And it felt like someone had literally just given her a line reading and then they pressed go on the camera. And it was like every line that she read, it just didn't work. It just felt off. And there was this one poor guy who came into he was like a delivery guy in a coffee shop. And I'm like, I don't know if he's an unknown guy. I didn't know him anyway. I'm like, was this guy's first role? Because it felt like it. It shows up everything. And I realized,
isn't that interesting?
With this super high frame rate, it was the actors who held really still.
Well, I tell you, because so much of acting and so much of how we convey emotions to each other in general is about all kinds of little microfacial expressions and body movements. And we look at each other's eyes when we talk to each other, and you really want to understand if someone's, being honest. You're looking right in their eyes, right? And our eyes don't hold still ever. Right. So, and it varies by person and by whatever you're thinking you're talking about and looking at, but your eyes dart around like crazy. And I'm the fidgetiest person in the world. And I would probably look pretty, I don't know if I would look odd in a super high frame rate. I've now videotaped myself.
I can tell you that you would, because what I sort of came to realize is anybody who moved, if you move like a stage actor does, because I mean, a stage actor is moving more than normal life.
Yeah.
You would look absurd in high frame rate. So Mary Elizabeth Winstead has sometimes, I mean, most people consider her a really good actress, but some people criticize that she seems a bit like deadpan in a lot of the stuff that she doesn't, she never makes big facial expressions. She doesn't move a lot, but in high frame rate, it was like, she barely ever blinks. She holds her eyes steady. Like a lot of people do that thing where their eyes bounce back and forth when they're looking at someone. She holds her eyes steady. She barely ever blinks. She keeps really still. She has really good posture. And it was like, you put all those things together. So here's this high frame rate capturing all the movement. And it's the people who barely move who now look good.
We know so much of good cinematography is guiding a person's eye to what you want them to see and having everything else kind of fill in. That's why going frame by frame through a movie can look so hilariously bad sometimes, especially with special effects and stuff. And it's true with facial expressions. So, back in the day, I guess they still do this, but, they would do screen tests with people to simply see what they looked like on the screen.
Yeah, because
and you
being
would think,
telegenic and videogenic is different from
It is different. Some people photograph really well, and some people don't. And then some of those people who don't in real life, they look fantastic.
Yep.
It's just really strange. So it's going to change everything, kind of like HD did.
Exactly.
And different actors will now be favored for simply the way they move and the way they express themselves and the kind of, I think that's really fascinating.
It was.
But I want to just make sure that, for me as a fan of the high frame rate, I want people to understand it's not the technology. It's just different. It's not that it's bad to have 60 frames per second or 120. It's just, it's going to take different stuff.
Well, that was just it. I mean, my whole takeaway was so if you're just taking Gemini Man as it is today, is this the pinnacle of what, shot at 4K at 120 frames per second, 3D? Is this the pinnacle of what it could be? Absolutely not. This is the starting point.
But you don't even know what it really looked like. Maybe some of these actors looked even better in 120 frames per second.
And there were some, he purposely did some really fast whip pans that I could tell were meant to show off 120. And even at 60, it was being slightly obscured. But
I gotcha.
What my absolute takeaway is, there is a learning curve to this.
With anything,
my thought was, if this is the way movies go, because they always talk about, there's kids who are growing up with everything was shot on their iPhone and they're used to videos being shot at a high frame rate, and to them 24 frames per second isn't any kind of nostalgia or right or whatever it is. They're just going to be used to that video look already. And there are the people who decrying, no, don't let 24 frames per second go away and blah, 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 blah. I'm like, no, if this is the way movies are heading to this high frame rate, I'm not against it. I'm not going to be picketing against it. I'm not going to be saying you must retain 24 frames. I'm like, no, this can be okay. But there's definitely a learning curve. It changes.
It's a different thing. Yeah. It's just a different thing. I mean, and so do different methods for the different thing. And when you're combining high frame rate and that high resolution and 3D, that's a lot going on there.
It is.
And that whole concept of guiding the eye, in real life, you expect that whatever you aim your eyeball at, it's in focus, even though it's not. When you're not looking at it, you're turning your focus real quick. Your eye is very, very good at focusing real quick. And you can't do that if there's a shallow depth of field. And so you're in 3D and your brain says, oh, we're looking at real life. Let's look around and get the scene. And you can't anymore. It's so interesting. And I think you're right. It's just that learning curve. They got to figure out all these new functions, all these new quirks.
Yeah, because everything to do with setting, lighting, it was so obvious. You're shooting at 120 frames per second, so everything has to be lit more brightly because the exposure time of each frame is so much lower. So there was tons of the day for night look is back because it had to be. You can't shoot night at night at 120 frames per second. It's kind of like
shooting Technicolor in 1938.
Right.
Because the film wasn't sensitive enough.
Yep.
And as the film got better, the lighting didn't have to be so bright. And so that'll happen too in the future. The sensitivity of the digital sensors will get better at that resolution. So that'll all change. I'm going to have fun watching this happen. I just can't wait to see a high frame rate movie one day in my dinky little town. Well, I can watch them on my TV.
Yeah. Billy Lynn's Long Halftime Walk was released at 60 frames per second. 4K resolution on Ultra HD Blu-ray disc, but of course not in 3D because the format doesn't have that, and not at 120 frames per second because the format doesn't have that. But I'm assuming Gemini Man will also be released that way. So at least you'll get to see it at 4K 60. So you'll get to see the motion side of things. Right. Whether the 3D for that whole depth of field thing and things out of focus, slightly in the back of that might not impact you as much when it's not in 3D.
It won't. I think you're right because I think your brain is like, when you start to see 3D, your brain goes into real life mode.
That's right.
And expects to be able to just look at everything like life. And when you're looking at a flat screen, you're in television or movie mode in your brain. You're looking at a picture.
But the other thing I definitely wanted to touch on is, so I already mentioned about the punching and kicking and how if anything was pulled, you could tell. But explosions too. Explosions, gunshots, things like that.
Yeah.
All I could think when I was watching it is, I'm watching, if you go to Universal Studios and you watch the Waterworld live, the live show that they put on.
Yeah. And the poof comes out of the tubes.
Something like that. Or, they do fire the musket or whatever, and there's that. I'm like, everything looks like that, which I guess it looks more like real life, but for some reason that looks more fake when you're watching it on a big movie screen
because we're used to movie effects. People think that cars roll over and explode 200 feet in the air.
But the thing was, things still did do the movie explosion. When a building blows up, it's a movie. A building doesn't blow up in a giant fireball of orange, right? But in the movie, it still does. And when it does, I'm like, but that's like a miniature being set off with a pyro. Like it doesn't. Everything looks fake now. So fire looks like real fire, but what comes out of the
small and.
Well, and when it was CGI muzzle flashes versus an actual blank muzzle flash, I'm like, oh, wow, that looks bad. Like, you need better CGI for those muzzle flashes. That looks terrible. So, again, learning curve to all this stuff. But ultimately, my point was, I think a little bit of blur in certain instances is still preferable. And so some people have talked about variable frame rate throughout a film, and most people have mentioned, do high frame rate for the action scenes and low frame rate for the close-ups because people look weird. And I'm like, well, not if they hold still like Mary Elizabeth Winstead does, but
you just need different people. Some people are going to look better. But it's just how it is.
I actually want a really granular variable frame rate because I'm like, for a certain instant, I want there to be a little bit of blur because it just looks like it's behind the scenes footage. I'm sorry, it does. And I'm like, if you can do that for that part, but then the scene or the shot right after it, the continuing shot right after it ramps back up.
Wouldn't that just really complicate it from a technical standpoint, though?
But we have displays that do variable refresh rate matching. I'm like, it's all coming together. I ultimately, I want the directors and the editors to decide, is what I'm saying. I'm saying I don't think we need a fixed frame rate. I don't think. Because even the guy who was like pioneering a lot of the shooting at 120 frames per second. He was like, well, yeah, shoot everything at 120, and then you can show certain scenes at 24, but what you can actually do is take 5 real frames and superimpose them on each other and get your blur back.
And believe me, I know some about that when I'm trying to convert 60 frames per second to 30.
Right.
And especially if it's interlaced, God help you.
There you go.
So you get more blur, your motion gets schmooey, but your interlacing goes away. Anyway.
But this is why I think Avatar is taking so long, because James Cameron is a bit of a perfectionist. He's doing this super, he's doing 120 frames per second stuff. Yeah. And I'm like, this is why, because he is the type of guy who he's going through his dailies. He's seeing all this stuff. He's like, we got to make it better.
He's pushing the technology. He wants to. There's probably a green screen shortage if he's working on Avatar right now. By the way, I'm going to have to cut this short soon, simply for biological reasons. Because
we are right there. I think we have wrapped this up. So I will simply mention Chris M., Eris V, and Mark O are on the list. We'll be here for our Halloween special when Tom is back. So yeah,
even though it's not the real 666 show,
I know we'll all know secretly. But do want to say that we'll want to thank our listeners of the week. That's going to be our 87 Patreon patrons this week over at patreon.com/AVRant Podcast. That includes Brian F. If you'd like to donate a one-time donation via PayPal, come to avrant.com over on the right-hand side, and please send your questions to question@avrant.com. That is our email address. So Lee Overstreet, thank you so much for pinch hitting once again.
You're very welcome. Away. It's fun every time. I don't mind at all.
Well, that's fantastic. Thank you so much. So on behalf of Tom Andry for AV Rant, I'm Rob H.
And I'm Lee Overstreet. Now go out and watch some high frame rate. Hitting stop now.